Chapter 21 Sword Saint Part 4 Nina POV. He was a few steps away from her, in the empty training yard behind her house. A week before, he had been injured while training with his father, which still confused her. His father was a sword emperor, not the kind of man who could accidentally hurt his son while training. Gino had been forced to rest during those days, and that boy did nothing but train. He probably felt it was torture. And after a week, he suddenly recovered, surpassing her in every aspect. It was the day he became a sword saint. Although she could remember it vividly, it was not the day he defeated her for the first time in combat. It was not the day she saw him for the last time in her life, but it was perhaps the most terrible day of those first 11 years of life. Standing in the snow, she felt a difficult emotion, his gaze piercing her like a steel rope. She couldn't find the name of the emotion, although it was certainly unpleasant. It wasn't like the love she felt for him, it was different, something totally negative. The feeling was darker than the day she had first killed a man in a duel. It was more painful than when she had broken her arm while training with Lyra, the sword saint of the central dojo. It was more terrifying than the day she saw her father strike down an enemy swordsman. Nina Fawn worked on herself, forcing her mouth to smile, and she said, "Good job," to the boy 3 years younger than her. She saw something finally rise on his face, warming that frozen expression, his lips parted suddenly, his teeth gleaming against his eyes. That laugh burst from Gino and spilled across the yard from his small body. He laughed for a few long seconds. It was a display of childish emotion and alien to what Gino is. "Nina," he sighed, looking at her with those dark eyes. He had short brown hair. "Did you see that?" he said enthusiastically. "That was it, wasn't it? The long sword of light." "It must have been like that," she answered, and indeed it was. It was so fast that she couldn't even move. She was surprised that she didn't choke on her words. He nodded twice, shaking his head up and down, his eyes moving everywhere, to the sky, to his house, to her, but always coming back to the wooden sword he held in his hands. He wore a white training kimono, a common outfit, with bandages around his shoulders. His eyes were still dark, as they always were, like black pools, she thought sometimes. "I can still feel it, my Tuki," he said, looking at his hands again. "It's like electricity, it's humming all around me, it's perfect." He murmured. She was still smiling, wondering if she should stop smiling, or keep that expression. His eyes landed on her again and then looked away. He never looked at one thing for too long. "Let's go show my dad," she muttered. Everything moved quickly after that. It wasn't long before the two boys arrived at the central dojo, and it wasn't long before Gull asked Gino to fight. All the dozens of sword saints and the two sword emperors saw what happened. Her father stood up from his throne, took out his sword, and cleared the ground. He asked Gino to attack him. Once again, the boy moved faster than she could understand. Gino and his father, the sword god, were 10 steps away from each other. A second later, their swords clashed. She couldn't even see it happen. That was what disturbed her. That dark feeling came back, rising deep inside her chest like black tar. It didn't leave her for many weeks. In the end, she found a name for it: hopelessness. It was the lesson she learned that day. Gino officially became a sword saint. Her father nodded and smiled at her with that wild smile he only showed when a swordsman impressed him. Then he looked at her and raised an eyebrow. "Well, it seems your little boyfriend has figured it out. When will you be there too?" he said. He laughed after saying those words. Gino looked at him in silence but with confusion, the same as always. "Nina, are you okay?" A girl called out to her. She looked up from her bowl full of food, a mix of chicken and rice from Bigarret, bought in the village. Her mother always told her to eat between training sessions. Her friends were strolling through the market square, on an autumn day, a few girls around her age, between 11 and 14, all of them were advanced or intermediate rank, daughters of the sword saints who lived here all year round. Gino was studying with Gull in the central dojo. It had been a month since he had dueled his father, a month since he had become a sword saint, and the black tar was still on his chest. The townspeople walked past them as the group of girls walked down the busy street. With snow-covered buildings leaning on all sides, those who weren't swordsmen always gave them a wide margin of safety. Some looked at them with fear, others with respect, but the difference didn't change the distance between them. "Yes, why do you ask?" she said with a broken voice. They said something about him spending less time with them. She couldn't make out the exact words. Their faces stood out to her. They were all pale and brown-haired. They were more concerned with the boys in the village than their training, more concerned with buying new makeup than anything else. It was always the same, of course. She had spent less time with them. She had already wasted time that day. Gino was ahead of her every minute. He didn't take breaks. He never took breaks. She found herself thinking about the past years with disdain. Every day, Gino would go out for a run in the forest to train alone. She had never seen him sitting, talking to friends. She had never seen him think about anything other than his goal. The difference between them was their commitment. He was more committed to the sword than she was, and that was the plain truth. No wonder he broke that 3-year gap. No wonder when she spent her time doing things like this. She blinked, snapping out of her thoughts, those pale-faced girls staring at her with wide eyes. They said something else. She responded with something else. Minutes passed, more words. The conversation died down. She said goodbye to the girls and walked back up the main road, where the snow had flattened under the carriage tracks and foot traffic. As she left the town behind, she was surrounded by small houses and training dojos. She took a moment to breathe, alone. "I need to stop this. No, I need to work harder." She wondered which of those two voices would lead her to what she wanted. The girl had been dedicated to fencing like a fish in water all her life. Every day she swam against the current towards mastery. All the adults told her that she was destined for it, that she had it in her blood as the daughter of the god of the sword. It was a path laid out for her from the beginning. Sometimes, Nina Faran wanted to go out into the woods and fall asleep forever. The other children had no frame of reference for someone like Gino. He was different from most in his way of thinking, but Nina knew him. She knew he loved to use swords. She could relate to him because of that. They were the same and walked the same path, but Nina could see that a new day would soon come. She would go so far that there would be no point in looking back. If that happened, she would end up like all the other children. Gino would become a stranger to her, which terrified her. For months later, Nina became a sword saint in the middle of winter. It was her 12th birthday. That day, after making the long sword of light and beginning to see the world in a new shade of color, she was officially allowed to enter the central dojo. Despite this, she never defeated Gino Britzes in a sparring match again. The gap between the two continued to widen. Gino Britzes studied under the gaze of the sword god in the central dojo a few times a week. Other days he would go train alone for countless hours. He didn't seem to follow any routine. He just trained and studied as he wanted. Despite his age, he held one of the fastest swords in the central dojo and on his way to being a sword king. None of the other sword saints could keep up with him in a fight. Nina Farayan continued training alongside him, losing contact with those friends of hers and following the path she had chosen. In the eyes of her father, she finally began to mature. He looked at the two children with pride. They were the young stars of the holy land of the sword and would probably lead the next generation of great swordsmen. Engl was not wrong. Besides, he believed he would leave his daughter in good hands if the two were to marry. Chapter 22. The plan failed successfully. It's been a year since I became a sword saint. I'm now 9 years old and Nina is 12. Who would have thought that all this discovery was because my father opened my chest with his sword, huh? But besides that, my father had some kind of reason. That duel I had with the catapult my sword skills all levels I don't think possibles. Just to give you an example, the original Gino Britzes became a saint of the sword at the age of 12, and now I am 9 years old and have been a saint for a year. Everyone was right when they said that this guy had enormous potential, but now here I am exploiting that potential properly. Also, 4 months after I became a sword saint, Nina became one too. Apparently she didn't want to be left behind, and I can understand that. But finally, the 3-year gap has closed. Now I am more powerful than her. In fact, at just my age, I am the 4th fastest swordsman in the dojo. But not only my swordsmanship has improved, but also my magic. I am now able to cast 60 beginner-level spells or 6 intermediate-level spells or 3 advanced-level spells before passing out. How cool, right? I know this is nothing compared to Rudeus and also not to people like Roxy. In fact, my reservations are barely at a level, how to say, above average. Let me explain. Let's say Rudeus is a 100, Sylphie would then be a 60, Roxy a 40, me a 25 and a normal person a 10. But still that's a good level. And magic aside, Gull recently told me that if I kept doing this I could be a sword king before I turned 12. That's tremendous progress. And I'm willing to achieve it. Ha! I screamed as I aimed my sword at Gulfarian's neck only to be deflected with minimal effort. This, however, was something I was already used to. Since I became a sword saint, and according to Gull the youngest in history, he began to train me personally. According to him, I am the swordsman with the most potential in a long time. And I've made good progress in the last few months, but I'm still years away from being at Gulfarian's level. When I felt my sword being deflected, I lost my balance and fell to the ground, landed on all fours, spun around and threw a sword of light at Gull's back, which he blocked again without the slightest effort. I instinctively took a step back as I looked straight at Gull. He looked totally relaxed, he was not on guard, and a sigh escaped from them. This was not a deception tactic, he was actually full of openings and had his weak points exposed. If he were a swordsman, anyone could finish him off immediately. But no. He is the god of the sword and the 6th strongest man in the world. Even if I were to attack him in that unprepared state, he's fast enough to block me effortlessly. I pressed my foot firmly into the wooden floor of the dojo, took a long leap forward and threw another long sword of light at him, which he repelled again. Even though you know I'm going to repel you, you have to give it your all, he said as he effortlessly broke my guard and made me fall face first to the ground. I tried to get up again. That's enough for today. Good job, he said with a smile. I looked at him in disbelief. For a few months now, he always looks at me with smiles, and it seems that my presence is no longer so uncomfortable for him, which is good. This way I win over my father-in-law. Thanks for the training, I said with a bow. You don't have to do this every day, you know? He said with a disgusted expression. I'm sorry, I won't do it again, I said, bowing again, which made him make a tease sound with his tongue as he sat back down on his throne. I looked outside, and judging by the lighting it was barely past noon, so there was still some time left for today. I made my way among the sword saints. After all this time I have now earned their respect. I walked a little and there was Nina with a frown on her face. Could you see anything? I murmured as I sat down next to him. She sighed as she looked at the ground. No, you're still too fast, she murmured. And yes, even though I am in the same range as 99% of the students in the central dojo, it seems that my speed could be that of a very weak sword king, which is already a lot for them, even more so for poor Nina. She has had her own growth, but it is slower compared to mine. Do you want to train? I murmured as I lightly tapped her on the shoulder. So you can kick my ass in front of everyone again? No thanks. She snapped with a frown. I could only shrug at this without being able to say anything else. You can imagine why. The rest of the day I spent watching the duel of other sword saints and practicing my swings. When the sun began to set, it was time to return home. At dinner there were no setbacks. Dad and I told Mom about our day at dinner, and then I went to bed. Lately I have been trying to replicate the magic distortion technique, but as you can imagine it is not easy at all. With my low amount of mana, something like that could not be more impossible for me. But with my perseverance I can barely achieve anything, and yes, I can destabilize very large beginner-level spells but nothing more. And I've been practicing this for about 6 months. But isn't hard work what has characterized me? After a practice to increase my mana reserves, I went to sleep and woke up as always early in the morning, went for a run, came home to train with my father. We had breakfast and then we left for our respective dojos. It seemed like today would be a summer day like any other, but I couldn't be more wrong. The day passed as usual until noon. Gul Faran called me to train again. We had a duel where he kicked my ass. Seriously, after all this time I still can't see his movements. I can even briefly see my father unsheathing his sword when we train in the mornings. But Gulfarian's sword seems to be invisible. Twack! The metallic sound of our swords clashing echoed throughout the dojo. I was almost out of breath and Gul looked bored. As usual? Gulfan muttered as he looked outside. Since it's summer we usually keep the dojo doors open unless it snows, and today it wasn't snowing. What the hell is wrong with the sky? He muttered as he looked outside. Even without paying attention to me, the bastard seemed to be acting on instinct. But am I so weak for the one who even gives himself the luxury of looking at the sky? But notice something. Some sword saints looked at the sky in the same way. That's how I looked at the sky. Too. No memes. I murmured. The sky was a greenish color with some flickering yellow and red hues. The colors seemed to swirl around each other. I didn't know what the hell that was. No. I did know, and it could only mean one thing. The sky was the same shape as in the mana disaster. Yes, it must be around this time. Rudeus must have already turned 10 years old in that case. Wait a minute, wasn't Rudeus supposed to be not born in this timeline? So that bastard Hidegami lied to me? No? He looked very relaxed when he told me that Rudeus was stillborn. So what? Focus, Gul Faran said, kicking me out of my thoughts. The sky is weird and what? If it were a real fight you would already be dead, he scolded me. Oh, sorry, I murmured, avoiding bowing. I barely managed to concentrate for the rest of the day. The greenish skies suddenly dissipated a few moments later, meaning the mana disaster had occurred. But why? Does that mean that Hidegami lied to me? I wouldn't be surprised. Even at dinner I could barely concentrate on what my parents were saying. After dinner I took a quick shower. I wasn't in the mood for my magic practice, so I skipped it for the day. I lay down on the bed hoping to sleep. Thank goodness all my days are tiring, so I always fall asleep easily. I opened my eyes who knows how long later. I was in the world of emptiness. Are you kidding me? I muttered as I looked at the being in white in front of me. He had his arms crossed and looked anxious. Something interfered with my vision of him. He murmured. So, Rudeus was born in this timeline? I muttered as I felt a smile forming on my face. That bastard, how could he? Hidegami muttered to himself. So if you already know he's here, why are you contacting me? I asked. I'll make you a proposal. Hidegami muttered. I raised an eyebrow at this. What proposal could you offer me that doesn't involve the destruction of everything I love? I said, pointing at him with a finger. Grr. Let me finish, you motherfucker. He shouted angrily. I've checked it. No matter what I do, any interference with it links directly to Orsted and subsequently to my destruction. He said, clenching his fists in anger and stamping one foot on the ground. Yeah, I guess that's true, I said with a smile. And what is your aforementioned proposal? I asked with a raised eyebrow. The fate of the being known as Rudeus Greyrat and Roxy Magurdia is the strongest I have ever seen. He murmured. But yours is even stronger. I couldn't interfere with you if I wanted to. He muttered. I remained silent as I watched him. What I mean is that I could pull some strings, change some things, and I could get you and Roxy Magurdia to meet and, fuck it, I'm even doing you a favor. What I mean is that I can make Roxy Magurdia fall in love with you before Rudeus. He spit. I was in shock at this, but obviously I knew why. The bastard would do everything possible to prevent Lara from being born. And he knows that even if he tried, Roxy can't die just like Rudeus. So I'm his last hope, huh? If I do you promise not to mess with me or Rudeus and his family? I muttered. I couldn't if I wanted to. For some reason their fates are unusually strong this time. He murmured. Then I accept, but don't mess with me or anyone in my inner circle or I'll ally myself with Orsted. I declared. The faceless bastard clenched his teeth and fists but nodded his head, and immediately I felt a force pushing me back and I woke up. Was that a win for me? Chapter 23 New Goals. I woke up. It was about 4 in the morning. Shit! I muttered as I got out of bed. The deal I made with Hidegami is still in my head. If he doesn't mess with Rudeus' family or mine, I can be his pawn to seduce Roxy. What a humiliating piece of shit, and I can't do anything about it. As I put on my workout clothes, my mind was occupied with the possible consequences of my actions. To begin with, Hidegami realized my existence because according to him the story changes, but in what sense does the story change? Also, how come Hidegami couldn't see Rudeus? Did the Miko of Return summon my soul because something went wrong? Probably, but I'll be dead by the time she's born, so there's no point in thinking about it, which is depressing. I put on my workout clothes, washed my face with water magic, and went out for a run. The thin layer of snow crunched under my feet. I often take the path to the village and back until I reach the central dojo and then return home again. That has been my route for years, and I have no plans to change it. Also, something new is that I can see Nina training outside her house every morning that I spend running, and since I became a saint of the sword, she seems to have acquired motivation. I passed by the dojo and turned around and ran back home. I arrived home as usual and jogged to the backyard where my father was already doing his swings. Without saying a word, I started doing my own swings. I no longer have a defined limit of swings. Now I just do it until I feel my body fully active. This simple routine takes about 2 hours, and my mother is already making breakfast by the time we finish. My father sits at the kitchen table and I take a bath while we wait for breakfast. Because of the cold of the place, people here don't usually take baths much. Obviously, I found this totally repulsive, and I always use water and fire magic to take hot baths. When I get out of the bath, my parents are already waiting for me with breakfast. And so my time came to go to the dojo. Tack, tack, tack. The sound of wooden swords echoed throughout the central dojo. It was now just after 10 in the morning. After a bit of self-imposed motivation, I finished my daily sparring with Gull, and now I'm sitting on the floor catching my breath. The guy always kicks my ass, but I feel some daily improvement. The sparrings always end with a, "That's enough for today. Think about what you did today and what you can do to improve it." It's something I always do, and I feel that it is bearing fruit. Gull himself has confirmed it. The physical barriers, all those things are in the past. I will no longer stagnate because I have a baby's body. My Tuki only gets stronger day by day, and it doesn't stop. That boy is destined for something great, some sword saints murmured, and I couldn't agree more. After all, it's me, Gino Britzes. But still, it's been almost 10 years here, and I have never left the sacred land of the sword. Unlike the original Gino, I do want to go out and see this world. The world of Mushoku Tensei. Even if I make myself the sword god, I want to see the world before that, become famous and have adventures. Having power simply to protect your family. Nonsense. Power is useless if it cannot be used. I'm not Alec 3, but I would like some recognition in this life. When I defeat Gull in the future, I don't want people to say, "Who is that random? Did he have any feats before?" He only defeated Gull because he was an old man. I don't want any of that on my resume. But the other thing is that I don't want to leave my family alone, especially with the threat of Hidegami. I just can't. I don't trust the bastard. Trusting him is the stupidest thing anyone can do. But my future father-in-law is the sword god. My father is a sword emperor. Incredibly strong people who can protect themselves. Even Nina is above average. Could be. Ino, Gino. Nina's voice quickly brought me out of my reverie. We were both sitting on the floor of the central dojo watching other saints train. I could easily see the movements of these and could counter them. Even with older people, I see that they have some flaws in their posture, but it is Gull's job to point this out, not mine. "Do you want to go train outside?" she murmured as she looked into my eyes. I smiled at this. I guess she doesn't want me to humiliate her in public, huh? Yes, near the dojo or in the forest? I asked him. Forest, she replied dryly. Okay, then let's go, I replied, getting up from the ground. I walked with Nina, avoiding the saints sitting on the floor. I could notice that Gull looked at us out of the corner of his eye, but he quickly became interested. I walked for about half an hour in the woods with Nina. We got close to the place where I was attacked by that bear 3 years ago, but I didn't mention it. I still remember the look on her face that day, and I don't think she remembers that moment very fondly. We finally stopped in a slightly cleared spot, walked 10 steps away from each other, and got into a fighting stance. Are you ready? I asked as I slowly raised my sword. She frowned but nodded. In the blink of an eye, I closed the distance between us and lightly hit her on the shoulder, making her fall on her ass. Are you okay? I asked him. She had that same frown on her face and looked me straight in the eyes, but then she took a deep sigh and got up from the ground. I guess it's my turn now, she muttered as she got back into a fighting stance. She planted her right foot firmly on the snowy ground, and with a long jump she lunged towards me. How slow. Her posture is good, her technique is perfect. A perfectly executed long sword of light no longer has the same defect of applying more pressure on his right arm as it did months ago. But then, why does it look so slow? I quickly stepped aside from the sword's path. Nina was exposed by her own impulse. Even so, she will scold me for not taking the opportunity, so I guess it's okay, right? With a quick movement I directed my sword to her rib but quickly changed direction to her wrist so as not to hurt her too much. It was not a very strong blow, and I think I held back too much. But it was enough to make her drop her sword and fall face first into the snow. Poor Nina fell face downwards on the ground, sliding forward slightly. Oh, are you okay? I muttered as I helped her up. She wasn't looking at me, she was actually looking at her sword. I also noticed a slight streak of blood on her nose. I'm sorry about that, I murmured. You actually held back, didn't you? She scolded me while wiping her nose. Yeah, well, we're talking about you, Nina. I'd rather not hurt you if I can, I said with a smile as I put my hand on her shoulder. In that case, shouldn't you make sure I don't fall face first on the ground? She complained while blushing deeply. I lowered my head at this, not knowing how to respond. So we spent about an hour like this. Dueling became a useless thing for us, so we just got Nina to attack me and I repelled her attacks in the hope that she would become faster. It was already around 5 p.m. Nina fell breathless on the ground while I leaned against a tree to rest lightly. Nina, can I ask you a question? I said. What is it? She murmured between heavy breaths. Are you happy with your current life? I said. She looked at me directly with a raised eyebrow but then looked up at the treetops as if she didn't know what to say. I guess so. After all, I have you and the sword, she said with a murmur as she blushed again. Oh, Nina, you touch me, but I didn't want that as an answer. I see, but have you ever wanted something more? I murmured. In what sense? She replied, clearly confused. Sigh, how can I explain it to you? Haven't you ever wanted anything more in life than me and the sword, like some dream or future hope? I murmured. Well, yeah. She murmured with a weak smile as she blushed again. Yeah, become a sword king and kick your ass, she said nervously as if she had forgotten something. "'Kay," I murmured. But, why do you ask? She said. Well, how do I explain it? I want to travel the world, you know? I don't want to spend my whole life here without having seen the world other than here. Have you ever wanted that? I said, looking at Nina. But my eyes widened when I looked at her. She was frowning and tears were building up in her eyes. So, you want to go? She murmured. Well, not exactly leaving. It's more like a trip around the world and then coming back. Yes, that. I said nervously. She took a deep breath in and out at this. Asterisk, and when do you plan to leave? She murmured, trying to calm down. I don't have any plans, it's just an idea, something I want to do in the future, I said with a nervous smile. I see. She muttered as she got up from the ground, and then she hit me hard on the shoulder. And why was that for? I complained. She didn't say anything but sat next to me and rested her head on my shoulder. For scaring me, you little asshole, she muttered. Ah, I see. For a couple of months now he has distanced himself from his friends and now we only have each other. How could I be so stupid? But still, the idea of traveling the world is not something I'm going to give up so easily. It took Nina a few moments to calm down, but in the end we decided to go back home. I walked beside her but she walked with me, arm in arm the whole way, and we were intercepted by Gull. He wanted to make fun of us but he noticed Nina's expression and raised an eyebrow. I didn't want to investigate this further, so I quickly said goodbye and returned home. It was time to talk to my parents about my idea. Chapter 24 Negotiation. At dinner, after dropping Nina off at home, I headed to mine. It was about 6 in the evening, but due to the summer it was still relatively bright. The sun had already set but the sky was already a bluish-orange color, so it would soon be night. The snow crunched under my feet on my way home. My idea was already in my head. I wanted to go out and explore the world, but first I would have to ask my parents' opinion. It took me about 30 minutes to get home. It was already night, the outside lamps were already on and Dad was probably already home. I'm back, I announced as I polished my shoes at the entrance. Oh dear, make yourself comfortable, dinner is ready, my mother said while serving food to my father. My father was sitting at the table as he watched Mom serve dinner. I sat to his right and Mom served me food as well. Dinner went by without a hitch. I waited until at least my father finished his meal to talk. Dad, can I make a selfish request? I muttered. Both my father and my father looked at me strangely. What kind of request? He asked as he crossed his arms and stared at me. Well, I want to ask you something first. I muttered as I squirmed uncomfortably in my chair. Dad, have you spent your entire life in the sacred land of the sword? I murmured, something I had never asked before. My dad squinted and scratched his chin with a finger. No, I was born in Milbots, a city in the nearest district in one of the 3 magical nations, he said. I nodded at this, unable to hide my surprise, although I had already expected it. There was no need to ask Mom, since she and Gull were born here. I see, but did you ever travel around the world, Father? I murmured, choosing the words I used carefully. My father raised an eyebrow at that as he looked at me, though I guess he already got the idea of what I meant. Yes, in my youth I roamed all over the central continent before settling here, he said while looking at me. I tried to speak but he raised his hand stopping me. I see where this is going and my answer is no, he said firmly. I could only frown in response but kept silent as he was right. First of all, you are too young, you haven't even turned your 2nd birthday yet. Yes, you are strong, in fact you are much stronger than most of the people in the dojo, but that doesn't cover the fact that you're still a child, plus I won't leave your training halfway, he stated firmly. I looked at my mother but she nodded with an apologetic smile indicating that she agreed with Dad. Even though I knew this could happen, it's still frustrating. Don't make that face, you're still young, but once you grow up enough you'll be allowed to travel the world as you please, my dad said with a smile as he leaned back in his chair. How long are we talking about? I muttered. When you turn 12, since that's when I left home, he said in a serious tone. 12 years, the same as Paul's time fleeing the Natos area? My mother seemed unhappy with that answer, but with a sideways glance from my father, she remained silent. But Gino dear, why this sudden desire to leave? My mother said with concern. Oh no, here we go. Dabu. I've spent my whole life here, and I want to see more than this. I muttered. I see, she murmured sadly. Oh shit, now she's using emotional manipulation. But it would only be temporary. Just a couple of months and I would return home as usual. I said in panic. No. I understand, it's just that you caught me off guard. Sometimes I forget that you're already a sword saint. Mom murmured. I gave him a weak smile and we continued eating. I continue the awkward dinner without saying another word. At least I tried, you know. Although it is somewhat boring to be in the same place for years, This world is too vast for me to spend my whole life here. After dinner, I locked myself in the bathroom and immersed myself in water that was magically heated. Ha yeah. I let out a sigh as I looked at the wooden ceiling. I felt my muscles relax with the warm water. I submerged myself up to my nose with my eyes closed. Now what do I do now? No. In fact, I already know. It's just my own anxiety that makes me act. Who guarantees me that Hitagami isn't cheating on me? Who guarantees me that he's not using my lust to manipulate me? I really haven't learned anything? Rudeus from the future, Jess, Luniana, Laplace? All people manipulated by Laplace and led to ruin. What guarantees me that Hitagami won't cheat on me and that I won't look stupid trying to seduce Roxy? I thought I was smarter. I got out of the bathtub as best I could and fell face down onto the bed. Fatigue overcame me and I fell asleep. I opened my eyes and woke up in the same white void. Son of a bitch, now what do you want? I murmured, oh, and that coldness, not even a hug? He murmured with a malevolent smile, shut the fuck up, what do you want? I said disdainfully. Hitagami's smile disappeared as he crossed his arms. Rudeus Greyrat, Eris Boreas Greyrat, and Rugard Superdya, the three of them are gathered in the north of Baigoya on the demon continent, he said. Okay, that's good, and what about Rudeus' family? I said, Paul Greyrat and Norn Greyrat are in Roa, Lilia and Aisha Greyrat are south of the Chiron Kingdom and Zenith Greyrat is in Bigaret, he said, crossing his arms. Okay, everything is the same. Okay, that's fine, there's nothing out of the ordinary, but then why are you here? I said, frowning. Teach, I came here to give you some advice, he said seriously. No, don't give me that shit, all I want from you is some advice. I said in an accusatory tone. Hitagami stared at me while crossing his arms. I've started pulling the strings. Roxy Magurdia is currently heading towards Roa, he said with disdain. And what does your advice have to do with that? I muttered, making quotation marks with my fingers. Nothing. In your current state, Roxy Magurdia would only see you as a very strong child but nothing more. You must wait years to have a chance to seduce her. He said with a smile. I frowned at this. You think I don't know? If you're just going to tell me that, then go to hell. I said, giving him the middle finger. Hitagami made a sadistic smile at this. Oh, I can help you with your progress and you know it. He declared. I raised an eyebrow at this. How can you help me? You can't make direct contact with this world. I said angrily. That's not true. Remember that I've seen all the previous sword gods and I've seen how they have perfected their techniques. He said. Yeah, and then how could that help me? I accused him. Don't worry. In your current state, I can perfectly see that you are close to being a sword king. He declared with a smile. I remained silent at this. Although I could feel it, I had to not allow myself to let my guard down around Hitagami. That would be a mistake that would cost me dearly. You want to know how? Well, here's my analysis. Listen carefully. Your grip on your sword is stronger on your right arm, which slows down your long sword of light. You tend to lean slightly to your right when attacking, which does not allow you to take full advantage of your speed. Furthermore, you are still unable to embellish your sword with Tuki, a characteristic that would make you more deadly. Hitagami explained all this with a smile, and I could only watch him in silence. Why are you telling me all this? I murmured. I just want you to be stronger so that the day you meet Roxy Magurdia, she will be captivated by you. He declared, crossing his arms. Do you really want me to separate her from Rudeus? I muttered. I would kill her if I could. He screamed with a rage that made me shudder. Hey, the day you discovered me, what did you mean by me changing destiny? I murmured. Yes, your very existence drastically changed the fate of the people around you. With your parents it's not much, but with Nina and Gulfaran it's drastic changes, he muttered while scratching his cheek. What kind of changes? I muttered. Nina Faran, her potential has increased somehow. She is now a sword saint when in other realities it would still take her 3 years. This step will be a sword empress before she turned 20, he said, and with Gul Farun, as you grow stronger and close the gap between you two, he'll start to doubt himself, sooner now than usual, he continued. I didn't know what to respond to this. On the one hand it was a good thing with Nina, I was a kind of motivation for her, but with Gul, I knew how mentally unstable he would become and could fall easily into Hidegami's clutches. Hey, calm down, we already have a deal, right? I even consider it a favor. I'm doing you a favor. Hidegami murmured with a smile that gave me chills. Okay, I'll put into practice what you told me, just don't bother anyone. I muttered and Hidegami's smile grew so big that it made me uncomfortable. I promise, now be strong for me, will you? He murmured and I felt the same force pushing me back, waking up instantly. Chapter 25 Growing I woke up in bed with the unpleasant feeling of my back being sweaty. I looked out the window, and it was my normal time to wake up, so I quickly put on my training clothes and went out for a run. The cold air entered my lungs and stung my nose. My breath was visible as vapor in the air as I ran. Hidegami's words still echoed in my mind. That smile, those expressions of his make me so uncomfortable, and I instinctively doubt him. I can't let my guard down even for a moment. Become strong for me, will you? Those words from Hidegami are the ones that resonate the most in my head. He only wants me strong to keep me as a pawn. He wants to make me his trump card when he tries to kill Roxy. Only a stupid person wouldn't realize that. I could turn a blind eye and let Roxy and Rudeus get together, but then Hidegami would come after me. But it wouldn't hurt, right? It would only prevent Rudeus from fathering Lara, who is the heroine of humanity, who will help Orsted to overthrow that bastard god. It's not a big problem, right? Shit, what should I do? I mumbled as I leaned against a tree to catch my breath momentarily. I don't trust Hidegami, I will never be able to, and that favor of his that he asks of me, I know the serious consequences it will have. But it's me or Rudeus. I like him, but I wouldn't give my life for him if this ensures my survival and that of my family and loved ones. Then, shit, who am I kidding? I'm also excited to meet Roxy. It's something I can't help. I came back from running home to immediately do my swings. According to Hidegami, I apply more force to my right arm when attacking. 5 swings. My father is by my side supervising me as always while training in the same way. I heard him murmur as he looked at me. Keep it up, Gino, he said with a smile. I looked at him bewildered and then looked at my sword. You must be fucking with me. I continued training this way for the rest of the morning. It felt uncomfortable since I had never done it like this, but I had to hold on. My father praised me for improving my technique and told me to keep it up. I can't believe it's actually working. After finishing training with my father and having breakfast, I dragged my feet to the central dojo, where I could already hear some swordsmen swinging. Nina was there, of course. She was sitting on the floor and looked slightly agitated. She must have finished her training recently. Gino, she murmured as she slowly got up from the ground. Hello, I'm here. Have you been training? I told her as I took her by the shoulders. Nina blushed at this as she lowered her gaze. Yes. Dad is waiting for you, she murmured while looking at Gul, who was looking at us with a raised eyebrow. Shit. I fearfully approached Gul, but he gave me a smile and unsheathed his sword. I unsheathed my sword at the same time and got into a combat stance. So I'm leaning a little to the right. I stood slightly to the left under Gulfarian's gaze, lightly pressed my right foot in front of me, and held the sword firmly with both hands. I lunged at Gul at top speed. Our swords clashed, the metallic noise deafening my ears. By my momentum, Gul stepped back slightly while looking at me with wide-open eyes. I couldn't understand why, but he then gave me a terrifying, toothy grin. Apparently that bastard Hidegami was right. My posture was slightly off and I'm a little faster now, but that's all. That didn't change the fact that Gul was still stronger, nor did it change the fact that I couldn't land a single hit on him. I increased my speed a little but nothing more. I still have years to be at their level, but it's not impossible. My training session with Gull lasted an hour and he only finished until I could no longer get up from exhaustion. That's enough for today. Good job, Gino, Gull said with a smile as he returned to his throne. I just moaned in pain in response. The pain in my joints was such that I could barely move. I practically crawled until I reached where Nina was sitting and let myself fall to the ground with a thud, and I leaned against one of the walls of the dojo. I looked to my side and Nina positioned herself to get closer to me. Normally I would be happy, but I was in so much pain that I didn't want her to touch me. It seems you've improved, she said while caressing my arm to my surprise. I raised an eyebrow at this but let her continue. Yeah, your dad said I readjusted my stance and I'm a little faster now, but that's all, I muttered. I see, she said as she leaned on my shoulder, which made me shiver with pain. Between grimaces of pain and the warmth of Nina's body, I stayed there until the end of the day. In the end I returned home, and as soon as I had dinner I lay down on the bed. The next day my father scolded me for sleeping too much. Nina Pew. Everything had happened like a normal day. I trained with my love, with Gino in the forest, although the idiot continues to humiliate me. I guess he's getting even with all the times I did the same thing, and it would be hypocritical to demand that from him. According to Dad, he would soon be a sword king, even sooner than he imagined. He even bothers me that when that happens I will be able to marry him. I don't mind the idea, but it's early. But today, he said something that almost made me faint right there. Gino wanted to leave. I don't know what caused him, but he wanted to get out of here. Why? Did something happen? Is he bored already? Did he get bored of me? Will he come back? All those questions invaded my mind in a split second as I looked at Gino. So, you want to go? I murmured in pain, feeling the words get stuck in my mouth and tears forming in my eyes. I held back more tears as best I could, and now that I think about it, it's the first time I let him see me crying. Well, not exactly leaving, it's more like a trip around the world and then coming back. Yes, that. Gino said in panic. This statement made me sigh with relief. How silly, he just wants to know the world. It's not like he's going to leave me, right? Even after his clarification, I couldn't shake off my anxiety. I couldn't concentrate on my training, and in the end I returned home hugging Gino. My dad was waiting for us at the door. I could see that he was about to make fun of me, but something changed in his gaze. I didn't know what kind of expression he was putting on, but he became serious quickly. Nina, is something wrong? Dad said seriously as he looked at me with his arms crossed. He pretends it, but he loves me very much, and he only shows it in the privacy of the house. It's Gino, I murmured. Did he do something to you? My dad asked as he started to raise his voice. And no, nothing like that. It's just that. He told me that he wanted to leave the sacred land of the sword. I murmured as tears returned to my eyes. Dad raised an eyebrow as he looked at me in surprise. Well, that's unexpected, so you won't be back? He asked. No. He said it would only be for a few months, but... I tried to correct myself. My dad looked at me with a grimace as he let out a sigh. So you're sad because he wants to leave? For a few months, my father muttered. Do you really love him that much? Dad murmured, and I could only lower my head in shame. At this my dad let out another even bigger sigh and stroked my head. Don't worry, he's still young, and I won't let him escape from his training so easily, Dad said while laughing. I could only nod at this with a smile. The next day was more of the same, although Gino showed more progress and in a very short time, which left me totally surprised. But in the end Dad treated him a little badly, and my poor Gino was in pain, so the least I could do was give him a little massage in his arms. And also, that smile that he always gives me makes me shudder. I couldn't help it and I snuggled up to him, even though the poor thing was in pain. On the way back home my mother found out from my father that I liked Gino, and she kept bothering me about this for a week. The days continued to pass as if nothing had happened. Gino continued to get stronger, as did I, and he began to grow. He began to gain muscle. his shape before that of a child began to change to that of a young man. And so in the blink of an eye another year passed. Gino turned 10 and I turned 13. Gino's skill grew to the point that his sword became invisible to me. I even heard Dad mention that he would soon name him a Sword King. I could only stand in shock at this. It was impossible to believe, but that was Gino Britzes for you. The man I love and will spend the rest of my life with. It may sound very cheesy and all, but that's what I feel. Besides, I intentionally became more meek with him, so that he finds me attractive, this on Mom's advice. Sometimes Gino's question comes to mind. Are you happy? I don't know, but when I see him, I definitely am. Chapter 26 Sword King. Another year has passed, 365 days. Yesterday I completed a whole decade in this world. My birthday was celebrated without any setbacks. I had dinner with my parents and Nina and I had a nice day. Now I have noticed some changes in my body. My arms feel harder, so my muscles are growing quickly. Now I'm 140 centimeters tall, which is standard for my age. I have developed incredibly both physically and in sword skills. My magic, on the other hand. My mana reserves have already stopped growing, and these are my results. I can cast 80 beginner-level spells before I run out, or also 8 intermediate-level spells, or 4 advanced-level spells, or 2 saint-level spells. Or just 1 king-level spell. They are pretty good features, but I haven't tried higher-level spells. I'm somewhat satisfied with this, considering the 0 mana Gino was born with. But on the other hand, I have made huge progress with the sword. Now I can see when Gull draws his sword, but reacting is another matter. Now his sword is no longer invisible to me, but I can't dodge it either. But this amount of progress in such a short time leaves me ecstatic. Nina has also progressed enormously, not as much as at my level, but it's already stronger than before. And also, I notice something else. Apparently she likes me. It's not something new, but now I have no doubt about it. To begin with, she has become closer to me on issues other than the sword, and she has also become more affectionate with me. But unfortunately we are still too young. Wait for me 5 years, my dear, and I will be yours. And also when I look at Nina, I remember the thing with Roxy, and I can't do it. It would be breaking the destiny of this world. To begin with, if I seduce her, she will probably never give birth to Lara. So Orsted will never be able to fulfill his mission, and this will be just another loop like the rest. Now I just have to keep up appearances. I won't refuse, but I won't try to actively look for her either. In fact, I'll be her matchmaker. I've already decided. I already have Nina. Why would I want more? This simple thought makes me feel better about myself. Tack, tack, tack. The sound of wooden swords clashing filled my ears as I sat in the dojo. This was a day like any other. There was nothing to highlight. I'm sitting next to Nina watching 2 sword saints fight. I could see that Gull had a bored expression. In fact, he always had when he saw the saints dueling. But also, I was bored too. Their swords were too slow for me. I could see almost in slow motion how a long sword of light from one of the saints hit another in the chest. Was it always this slow? The saint who was hit in the chest rolled on the wooden floor until he became unconscious. I looked to my side and Nina was watching them with concentration, as were the other sword saints. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at this. I almost never duel with the saints, and the few times I do it is with a crushing victory on my part. Nina refuses to duel with me in public all the time, which is why my only training rival is Gull. And by the way he's looking at me, I guess it's time for our daily workout. With a slow movement I got up from the ground and made my way through the other saints who were sitting in the same way. Gull got up from his throne in the same way. Unlike other days, he didn't have that mocking smile that characterized him. He was serious. He looked at me seriously. This can only mean one thing. I'm going to get my ass kicked, and very strong. You noticed, didn't you? Gull said out of nowhere as he slowly unsheathed his sword. Notice what? I muttered doubtfully as I got into a combat stance. Don't play dumb with me. I saw your look. To you they are slow, right? Even though they are at the same level, they seem slow to you, don't they? Gull said as his signature smile formed on his face. I nodded at this as I looked at him in bewilderment. Very well, attack me, Gull said as a sign of the beginning of our duel. I closed my eyes slightly. I had never tried this before, but I tried to feel my tuki. There it is, that warm feeling in my chest. I've tried for years to manipulate that feeling. And only now do I feel like I can, and where do I want my tuki to go? Quick answer, my sword. If I do this, my attack power will become stronger, my sword more deadly, and my attacks faster. I thrust my sword into tuki and Gull Faran noticed it. Huh, you have to be kidding me, he said with a smile. Phew. I exhaled, releasing the tension from my body. I adjust my stance, my grip on the sword, and the pressure I put on my own body. I lightly placed my right foot in front of me and took a long jump. The 20-meter distance between me and Gull closed in less than a second. I raised my sword above my head and swung it down as fast as I could. A long sword of light immediately formed towards Gull's right arm. I could see that he opened his eyes in surprise, but with a quick movement the attack was stopped. I didn't stop there. I fell into the Spider-Man position and formed another long sword of light in the direction of his feet. He easily avoided it, but I could see that there was effort in stopping the attack. You're a very clever son of a bitch, he said as his image faded from my vision. Now it's Gull's turn to attack. Instinctively I ducked and felt his sword graze my head. Strands of hair fell in front of me. I turned around as quickly as I could and pointed my sword at his ribs. Gull dodged the attack with ease, and his sword turned invisible and hit me in the left shoulder, making me fall to my knees. But take advantage of that opportunity, that simple opportunity. I put all my strength into my right arm and threw a long sword of light with all my might. The flash of light grazed Gull Faran but missed him, though I could see his brow furrow slightly. In the blink of an eye his image blurred and I felt his sword on my back. All I knew after that was that I was shot towards the wall at top speed. I crashed into the wooden wall and fell to the ground with a thud. I looked at Gull with difficulty and he continued to look at me with a frown. And I could notice something, a small pink line on her cheek, no more than 3 centimeters long. Gull Faran ran his finger across his cheek, wiped away the drop and looked at her. Immediately a smile that made me shudder formed on his face as he looked at me. I had wounded him, that long sword of light. I had wounded him. I had wounded the sword god. Gino, you've gotten so strong, stronger than I thought, and in such a short time, Gull murmured as he helped me up. I looked at him bewildered and he had a huge smile on his face. You just turned 10 yesterday and you're already at this level. When I was your age it was barely an advanced rank, he continued. Gull was silent for a few moments, and then his smile became smaller but instead looked like one of pride. Congratulations, Gino Britzes. I, Gull Faran, god of the sword, name you from today, Sword King, he declared with a smile. My eyes widened at this. Sounds of disbelief came from the other saints and Nina looked at me in shock. I didn't know what to answer. I couldn't answer anything else. I could only stare at him. I also gave you the title of master. I have nothing else to teach you. If you want to be a sword emperor, then you will have to defeat another sword king, and if you want to be the sword god, then you will have to defeat me, he said while grabbing the handle of his sword. I was shocked at this. If I remember correctly, the title of master was only given to Eris after 5 years of training. Neither Ghislaine nor the emperors had it, and now he gave it to me. And now he's challenging me. I looked at him and allowed myself to smile. I'll keep that in mind, I murmured with a smile. Gull's smile faltered slightly and then he let out a laugh. Ha! Of course you will, you definitely will. He laughed. I looked at the other saints and they looked at us in disbelief. They looked at me. And besides, as Sword King you need a sword ideal for your skills. Come with me, he said as he entered his room, which was next to the dojo. My left arm hurt. My feet throbbed and I couldn't walk properly. I'll have to use healing magic at home. I followed Gull Faran out of the dojo. Just to the right of it was a small room that Gull used. Inside this room 3 swords were on a table. Go ahead, pick one, Gull said as he stood behind me. I did not recognize the swords, but I knew beforehand that all of these were forged by Julian Jalisco. These are part of the 49 swords of the evil dragon Kajikut. And now that he looked at them closely, he could only recognize a sword. Sorry, Eris, but I always liked this sword. The sword I had chosen was the simplest of the three. Its blade was thin and only slightly curved. There was nothing sinister or intimidating about it. In fact, its surface was clean and clean. A good choice, kid. This is the Phoenix Dragon Sword, Gull Faraon explained. I see. This isn't a common sword, right? I asked, feigning ignorance. The weapon that you had chosen had been a gift from the legendary craftsman known as the Dragon Emperor to the first sword god. It was a sword made for the sword gods, designed to maximize the potential of its offensive style, Gull explained. I analyzed the sword for a few moments. It was as simple as I remembered, and it was quite light, although it would take a while to be able to take full advantage of it due to my height. This is a magic sword. It doesn't seem to have any special abilities at first glance, but there are small mana channels running throughout the blade. They basically neutralize your opponent's Tuki, he explained. I looked at Gull Faraon and bowed to him. Thank you very much for your teachings, master, I said respectfully. Hey, you're welcome, Gull said as he gestured for me to leave the room. I followed him and we started to return to the dojo. That day I became a Sword King, a title that swordsmen can only dream of. And besides, Gino, if you want to marry Nina, you have my blessing, Gull said out of nowhere. Okay, that's good. Chapter 27 Realization. After choosing my holy sword, Gull and I returned to the dojo. As we entered, all the sword saints set their gazes on me. And now that I think about it, it's impossible for them to believe that a child of just 10 years old is already a sword king. Even I am surprised. I never thought it would take me so little time. Without a doubt, the potential of this body is enormous, huh? In both hands I carried my swords. In my right hand the sword I stole from NASCAR, and in my right the sword that Gull gave me. Obviously I would train with the Phoenix sword from now on. Gull Faraon said nothing and sat back down on his throne, and was about to push my way through the saints, but Gull spoke to me. No, you're not allowed to sit there anymore, he said as he stood up from his seat. From behind his throne he took out a kind of small bench and placed it to the left of his throne. I looked at him in disbelief, waiting for an answer. You are already a sword king and you must let everyone know it, he said without paying attention to my look. I slouched a little in embarrassment and sat down on the bench. It was a bit comfortable as it was lightly furnished, but nothing out of this world. In front of me were the other sword saints who continued to look at me in disbelief. Among them stood out Nina, who looked at me with a smile. And what about you? Keep training. Gull demanded of the other saints, who quickly began to swing or duel each other. The mere sight of this totally baffled me. I didn't expect to get to this point so quickly, but I'm satisfied. After finishing that day of training, Nina met me outside the dojo. Gino, you were amazing, she screamed as she hugged me. I hugged her back and stroked her back lightly, making her shiver slightly. You say that, but surely you didn't see anything, right? I said in a mocking tone. No, but still, congratulations, Gino, she said with a smile. We continued talking for a while until it was time for me to leave. I said goodbye to her with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. And so I returned home with both swords in my hands. It felt surreal. Sword King, I muttered as I walked through the snow, feeling a smile forming on my face. When I got home it was about 6 in the evening. It was about to get dark, and that's how I got home. Hey, I'm back, I announced as I took off my dirty shoes and put my old sword on the wall, carrying the Phoenix Dragon in my hand. Welcome home, Gino. Dinner is almost ready, Mom said excitedly. Welcome back, Gino, my father said in a calmer tone as he looked at me. My dad murmured curiously as he saw the sword in my hand. It was sheathed in fine black leather with silver embroidery and a belt to fasten it around my waist. And that sword? Dad muttered as he pointed at my new sword. How do I explain it? I muttered as I sat at the dining table. My father and mother looked at me in bewilderment. Sigh. Come on, what's stopping you, Gino? Well, today I officially became a Sword King, I announced seriously. My mother blinked several times in disbelief and a smile formed on Dad's face. A Sword King? Really, Gino? My mother muttered in disbelief. Yeah, the sword god named me one today after our training. Actually, I think it was something unexpected if I think about it. I muttered. My father did not know what to respond to this. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water and her gaze changed between me and my father. Congratulations, Gino. I always knew you would achieve that and more, Dad said with a smile as he patted my head. Oh yes, a normal reaction on his part, not counting the caress. But don't you think it's a little early? I mean, it was just her second birthday yesterday. My mother snapped. That only makes it more surprising, my dear. First, Sword Saint and now Sword King. My father said with a smile, and my mother didn't say anything else but had a conflicted expression. Faced with my father's support, my mother had no choice but to sigh. I still find it hard to believe, but congratulations, Gino. My mother said with a smile, and I smiled back. My father organized a kind of quick celebration, but in the end, the dinner went on as usual. But it seems that my father was left with a lot of pent-up emotion and he took it all out on Mom in the room. Poor Mom, she looks like she's suffering. Oh no, she's not enjoying it, what a bitch. Nah, just kidding, but it still seems like good news, even I can't fully process it yet. I could barely contain my own excitement, so I had to exhaust all my mana to fall asleep, and how did I do it? It was simple. I already had a lot of wounds and bruises, so I applied advanced rank healing magic 4 times and I was completely exhausted. The days passed and I adjusted to my new position as Sword King, and as I suspected, Ghislaine is the only Sword King besides me, so in order to rank up I have to beat her. But that will be quite difficult, since if my calculations are correct, she is helping in the reconstruction of Roa and there are approximately 2 years left before she comes with Eris. Although I suppose I have to wait, right? Besides, what's the hurry? I have almost all the time in the world, and I don't even want to be the god of the swords so quickly. I still want to travel this world and settle down with Nina, although that is already assured, but that is not the point. The days passed without incident. It spread throughout the sacred land of the sword that a child had become a Sword King. In the following months, the number of idiotic travelers increased, attracted by the rumor of my title. Needless to say, I finished off every single one of them, but the title was still in honor. My training with Gull, however, resulted in more of the same, although I could now slightly see his movements. Reacting to them was a totally different thing. But according to Gull, I was still making great progress. The technique of embedding my Tuki into my sword turned out to be easier than I thought. I felt that my progress was still huge. Every day I felt like I was getting stronger, faster, and more lethal along with my physical development. Also, Gull has become more open about me getting together with Nina, which I found completely out of character for him. Although, come to think of it, the original Gino was stuck in Sword Saint for over 10 years and only moved forward when Gull rejected his proposal to Nina. The bastard only got better to be able to fucking Nina. I don't blame him though. And in my case, I'm already Sword King at 10 years old. The difference is huge. This has been reflected in both Gull and Nina herself. And what do I mean? Well, she invited me to her house for lunch today in the middle of training at the dojo. Gull agreed, and in the middle of the day I stopped by Nina's house. Now that I think about it for the first time, the house, it is modest, just like mine. The house is right next to the central dojo, so the sounds of the wooden swords clashing reach here. I hesitated a bit before entering, but Nina pushed me inside. Mom, I'm back for lunch, Nina announced. Okay, it's ready, a female voice announced from another room. If I remember correctly, Nina's mother's name is Bania, a woman in her 30s with a strong character. Although she is affectionate with Nina and Gull. Oh, so you're already introducing your boyfriend, huh? Although let me tell you, darling, I already knew him. Hee, Nina's mother mocked, and Nina just blushed deeply as she looked at me. Wow, Really? Ahem. Good morning, Aunt. Yes, I would like to marry Nina, but isn't it a little early for that? I murmured. I heard a childish squeal behind me. It was obviously Nina, and her mother burst out laughing. Haha. I see. No wonder Gull likes you so much. You have the guts to court the daughter of the sword god kid. Bania said while patting me hard on the back. I laughed nervously at this, and Nina was looking at the floor completely blushed, but she was also smiling. Lunch was normal, not counting my aunt's teasing about how many children we will have or where we will live. Although I could easily ignore it, I could see that Nina took it dangerously to heart. I don't know if I should be mad about this, but even if I tried to say no, Bania would probably give Nina ideas when I'm gone, so it won't make sense. I was also able to easily win Bania's sympathy by praising her cooking and the way she organizes her house. And thinking about it, I get along better with my father-in-law than with my mother-in-law. How strange. It's almost always the other way around, right? But that's a vestige of my hard work. A short time later it was time to leave, and so we returned to the dojo. I could see that Nina looked quite happy. I love you, she murmured as we neared the central dojo. I turned around to look at her, but she was playing with her blue hair while having a shy smile. I love you too, I said as I took her hands. Next act, Nina lunged at me to give me a deep kiss. We stayed like that for a while until I voluntarily broke the kiss and we returned to the dojo. There Gull was waiting for us with a mocking smile. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. And so in the blink of an eye I turned 12. I thought it would be a year like any other, until Eris Boreas Greyrat arrived. Chapter 28. The Mad Dog. It happened in the blink of an eye. I'm 12 years old now, and my muscles and height have changed. Now I'm 160 centimeters tall, and I have some biceps, hee. It's also been 2 years since I became the Sword King. Fortunately, Hidegami hasn't revisited me in a long time. We're already in winter, but that doesn't change the general picture much. As it seems, the rumor that a child has become a Sword King spread like wildfire for some reason. This negatively influenced the number of wandering swordsmen who came to the dojo just to see me or challenge me to a duel. This was simply unbearable to me, but this is something that I will experience even if I become the sword god, right? My training, on the other hand, has progressed greatly. According to Gull, I am surpassing the threshold that millions can only dream of. And according to him, I have even surpassed the rank of Sword King, but I will only be able to progress to Emperor if I defeat another king. But the problem is that there is only one other Sword King besides me, and that is none other than Ghislaine Didoldia, who should still be in Roa. But there is no hurry, she will come to me. Nina's progress has also been good, not at my level, but it has been remarkable, since she became the strongest sword saint in the dojo, but she still needs time to become a Sword King. In addition, she has already turned 15 years old, so she is already an adult in this world. Suffice it to say that I took advantage of this by massaging those breasts, but we have not advanced further than that yet, only because my Gino Jr. is barely over 10 centimeters tall. But leaving that aside, you could say that we are already in a relationship, and the best thing is that I have the support of my 2 in-laws, and it will only be a matter of time. Before I turn 15 and we get married, Ahem, yes, life has been pretty good to me, and because of this I was able to allow myself a little more free time, and I used that free time in the Adventurers Guild, and that is reflected in my adventurer card since now I am an A-rank adventurer. I couldn't ask for more than that, but I remembered the hard way that the world doesn't revolve around me. Yet, it was a day like any other. It was about 5 in the afternoon, and there was a snowstorm outside, so I was very slouched in my seat. I was nervous from the moment I first saw her. The central dojo was silent when she entered through the doors. The large hall, with its clean and polished wooden floor, was filled with light. The dozens of sword saints were gathered to practice together, and the god of the sword himself watched over us all. The day was almost over. The sun had set behind the mountains and a snowstorm was whipping the walls. However, the air that touched my skin was warm, and the cold of the holy land of the sword did not whip me like before, since the days I became king of the sword. But when she opened the doors and entered with the winter light behind her, I felt a chill that invaded me. It was not for any apparent reason, but my hair stood on end. I had never seen anything like this before. A human with all the air of a wild animal. Her eyes were wild and she was squinting at us. She was assessing us, looking for a threat. Her hair was red and disheveled. She was not tall, but she seemed to fill the doorway, motionless. The fight had already begun, and from the moment she opened the doors, she was already tearing us apart in her mind. She was already planning how to do it. She took her first steps inside and the whispers finally reached my ears. The saints who were sitting on the other side of the room, their backs to the walls, each of them a veteran with decades of experience. That's Ghislaine, isn't it? The other Sword King? She's finally back. The saints murmured. Obviously, Eris wasn't alone. Ghislaine was coming with her. Ghislaine? It's really you? Ha! Gull's voice echoed in the dojo. He leaned back on his cushion, laughing to himself, the scars carved into his face stretched under the light. A shark-tooth grin spread across his face as he looked at the newcomers. The whispers died down around me. Master, Ghislaine said as she bowed with an expressionless face. I'm glad to see you, Ghislaine, but I can't imagine you came for no reason, right? Who is the girl? Gull said, losing the shark's smile. My disciple, Eris, Ghislaine replied dryly. Ghislaine put her hand on Eris's shoulder. It was a warm gesture. The girl took a step forward and her disdainful expression deepened. She has something to ask you, Ghislaine said. Eris opened her mouth, a sixth sense screaming in my ears, telling me this would end badly, even before the words reached my ears. I have no time for insignificant people like you, Eris said with total disdain. I was right. Unfortunately, Eris had her perception of reality totally altered by her bad luck. The saints in front of me burst into anger. Accusations and insults poured out from those veterans and elders. They were also proud. An insult to their god by a stranger was like an insult to themselves. For the sword saints, so many other arrogant swordsmen before her arrived in the same way and died before speaking. They had seen it before, but obviously, that was not what happened. I looked at Gull, sitting next to me. His legendary sword was sheathed at his side. Instead of the anger we had often seen erupt from him, the man did something strange. His face twisted, once again, and the scars on his face trembled. And then he chuckled. Everyone, silence! Gull commanded. All the saints shut their mouths. No one liked the master to besmirch them. You have good eyes, girl. Who are you trying to cut with your sword? Gull said Eris's eyes were violent. That was true. Was it good to have such obvious aggression? The dragon god. I want to kill the dragon god Orsted. Eris declared with her arms crossed. I'm sorry, dear, but no one can beat our donut maker. That name had a strange effect on Gull. If her bold insult made him laugh, then naming Orsted was the best joke he had heard all year. Gull burst out laughing. Haha, I see. If you compare me to Orsted, I'm certainly a small fish, huh? Gull laughed. I shifted in my seat, feeling the déjà vu of the situation. I see. So it's him you want to kill. So there's someone besides me who wants to kill him. Gull continued talking. Gull had a big smile on his face as he looked at Eris. I looked at the other saints in front of me. All these veterans and elders were frowning. Nina was in a corner with anger evident on her face. She looked at me and I gestured for her to relax. As suddenly as the laughter had erupted in him, it disappeared. The central dojo went silent, and he looked back at Eris. But, just saying it is easy, can you really do it? Gull asked. I will, Eris answered without hesitation. Gull smiled at this and stood up from his seat. All right, let's see your sword, Gull declared. He looked around the central dojo, at all of us, at the saints sitting with their backs against the walls and their legs crossed. He paused for a moment looking at me. We exchanged glances, but he shook his head and kept walking. Nina, you're her opponent, Gull declared. I frowned as she stood up from the crowd. Shit, it's been months since I've trained with Nina. I've become too fast to get anything out of training with her. and as I looked at those two facing each other, the chill in my arms remained. I knew that Eris was much more dangerous than her. If she continued like this, Nina would be seriously injured, but Gull won't accept a change now. It would be best to comfort her in private. The girls received training swords. Gull leaned back in her seat and rested her face on her hand. There it is. Something dark appeared in Eris's eyes. It was bloodlust, a desire to break something. As I recall, this was a provocation technique that Ruger taught her, and it really is effective. Then you do begin, Gull declared. Eris raised the wooden training sword in her hands, that bloodlust swirling around her, and raised it high. Her legs tensed, her head turned towards Nina, and she lunged at her. Rhea! Eris let out a roar that echoed through the training room. I could see it all in slow motion. She crossed the distance in an instant, a red stain to my eyes, and ripped the sword from Nina's hands. Nina fell back, her face twisted in surprise before Rhea attacked for the second time. The steel blade crashed into Nina's head, and she collapsed unconscious on the ground. This time there was no fuss. All the saints around me were more stupefied than anything else. I looked at Eris, the red-haired girl who was standing, panting, next to Nina's unconscious body. My empty hand closed on my knee. She was just as fast as Nina. I looked at Gull. He looked at his daughter, lying on the ground, with a strange emotion. If I could name it, I could call it disdain. How naive, huh? Gull muttered to me. I looked at him directly with bewilderment. I'm not sure what he saw on my face. Whatever it was, it made his smile come back. Very well, son-in-law, your turn, he said with a mocking smile which made me stupefied. Eris looked at me with the same bloodlust. She was already crouched, with her whole body ready to move in any direction. It won't work on me, dear. I smiled at this while taking the same posture as her, a toothy smile which made her raise an eyebrow slightly. Now, begin after both of you are in the center, although surprise attacks are also good. This time show me your sword after I give the signal, Gull said. Attack! Gull's voice echoed in my ear. The wind erupted and light flashed around me, the steel blade arcing downward, forward, with my entire body behind her. She was a blur of red, her own sword swinging from below. My sword curved around her guard and crashed into her wrist. I felt her bone crack beneath the wood and her sword flew from her hands. This was not all. Her healthy fist headed for my skull. I blinked for a moment before dodging her blow, but she didn't flinch. Her fist spun and headed for my jaw. I dodged it, but Eris still had those bloodthirsty eyes. Her fist changed to my stomach. I put my sword diagonally at the last second. Her fist hit the center of the wood with a crunch. Her eyelid trembled slightly. I moved at high speed and with a slash that hit her in a rib, and she crashed into the wall with a thud. The saints around me jumped in applause. Eris was unconscious on the wall, and Gull looked at me with a smile. Master, is that the other Sword King? Ghislaine muttered as she looked at me. That's right. He's as strong as you, or maybe more, huh? Gull burst out laughing, but Ghislaine was frowning. It was a good show, although it was obvious that she would lose to Gino still. Ghislaine, heal this girl and take her to a room. From today on she is a sword saint, Gull said. Thank goodness. This didn't affect the overall plot. The other sword saints tried to protest, but with just a threat from Gull, they fell silent. That was the day Eris came here. Chapter 29. The question, so, did you kick his ass? Nina muttered as we trained in the woods. Yesterday I defeated Eris in a sword duel. She was unconscious for a couple of hours but then recovered and went to the village with Ghislaine to look for a healing magician. For my part, I stayed in the dojo and secretly applied healing magic to him. Now we decided to train here. In fact, it is the first time in almost a year that we train together and alone. Partly because Nina felt humiliated by losing to Eris, but she was comforted by my anecdote about how I defeated her. Yes, she attacked first, but I disarmed her, and then she went for the punches, but I was able to handle her and knocked her out, I said with a smile. Nina smiled the same way and continued with her swings. She is now 15 years old and her body has developed well in the parts that should. This includes her breasts and her ass, which now really bounces when she makes swings. Gino, did we come to train, or are you just going to look at me with lust? She said in an annoyed tone as she buried her sword in the snow. Come on, you can't blame me, you are very beautiful after all, I said with a smile. Nina blushed deeply at this and began to play with the tip of her ponytail. Well, if you say so, I guess it can't be helped. I just remembered. You were also staring at that woman Ghislaine's breasts. Nina spat angrily. I am sorry, darling, but you can't deny that the way she dresses looks too provocative. I murmured. Nina frowned but nodded. It's true, she said and sat next to me in the snow. Take this opportunity to hug her around the waist and steal a kiss. We stayed like that for a few moments, just the sound of our breaths on each other as we connected our lips. It was about 10 minutes before I decided to break the kiss. I pulled away from Nina's lips, and she was breathing heavily and blushing deeply. I can't wait for you to turn 15. She murmured as she buried her head in my chest. This statement shocked me knowing what it meant, and I couldn't help but smile. Afterwards we spent the whole afternoon more flirting than training, although I didn't feel it as a loss. The next day passed like the others. I got up early. I trained with Dad, which now are serious duels, and now I can proudly say that I put him against the ropes, but it's still noticeable that I need some time to get over him. After this I went to the central dojo. It was approximately 7 in the morning. My way there was like any other, but I was surprised to see that at the entrance of this, Eris was swinging. She noticed me but just glanced at me, and I could hear her tongue making a teeth sound. I don't know why, but I just kept watching his swings. I don't know for how long it was, but besides seeing the intensity with which she did it, I could see that they had flaws. After about 3 minutes she buried her sword in the ground and looked at me with disdain. Despite the age difference, our height is almost the same, so there is no need to raise or lower the sights. Those fire-red eyes looked at me intensely and with tremendous hatred. Anyone who sees them would tremble, but I just smiled kindly. This made her blink in confusion, but nothing more. She continued to look at me with disdain and finally spoke. What the fuck do you want? She said dryly. Baby steps, Gino. Good morning, I said with a smile. I've noticed that although your swings are fast, I can see that you have some flaws in your techniques, I said. At this, Eris raised an eyebrow as she continued to glare at me angrily. Oh really? And what do you know about this? She spat and I had to swallow my sigh. Well, apparently more than you. In case you don't know, I'm barely 12 years old and I'm already a sword king. Consider my advice as a favor from a superior, I told her calmly. As if I'd be interested, she said disdainfully as she turned around and continued her swings. I could only look at her in disbelief and restrained my desire to kick her right there. Seriously, how come some people prefer tsundras? I had no choice but to enter the dojo, and I could see Gull talking to Ghislaine. Ghislaine turned quickly to look at me and she frowned slightly. I don't know why, but my presence made him uncomfortable. Good morning, Lord Sword God. I muttered as I sat down in my seat. What's with the formalities, brat? Gull said with a mocking smile as he looked at me. Yeah, sorry then, Gull, I replied. Ha, that's how I like it, you damn brat. Gull said while patting me on the back. Oh yeah, I also want to introduce you to Ghislaine. She's the other sword king I told you about, Gull said as he pointed to the beast woman in front of me. I bowed respectfully to her. After all, she was a woman to admire. Nice to meet you, my name is Gino Britzes, I said. Ghislaine de Doldia, she said dryly. Heh, very well, now that we know each other, what do you think of this brat's progress, huh? Pretty incredible, huh? When have you ever seen a child with so much potential? Gull said with a kind of pride and mockery in his tone. Yes, it's still impossible to believe that someone so young is so powerful, she said while looking at me. Indeed. If you relax too much, he can even surpass you before he becomes an adult. Huh, Gull said with laughter. I could see Ghislaine smiling slightly as she looked at me, but my gaze couldn't help but go down to those dark breasts. Even though I tried to hide it, Ghislaine noticed this, but she just ruffled my hair and left the dojo, probably to see Eris. The day went by well. When the other sword saints arrived, Eris entered the dojo. Although she sat in a corner alone, she already knew that this did not affect her at all, but I already knew that Nina had premeditated this. The training day passed, and I realized several things. Eris's style, although effective due to intimidation, is inefficient against people stronger than her. Her posture does not help her at all. She is too hunched over. She applies too much pressure on her right hand when wielding the handle of her sword and is always the first to attack without thinking. Too many technical errors that are compensated for by his natural aggressiveness. And because of all this, she is not able to make a long sword of light. She has the strength of a sword saint from her training with Rudeus, but only that imbalance in her body will make her unable to make a long sword of silence. I noticed all these mistakes while watching her train. And consequently I received many angry looks from Nina, but I had to clarify it to her at lunchtime. The next day was more of the same. Eris arrived in the morning, swung until she got tired, rested for a couple of minutes, and continued swung until it was time to leave. There was no progress in her technique, and that was bothering me. Maybe I could help her? With this in mind, I intercepted Eris on her way back to her room in the dojo. As soon as she noticed me, she clicked her tongue in disdain and increased her pace. Besides this, I noticed that she doesn't try to attack me. Maybe that duel made it clear to her that she has no chance against me, huh? Eris, I was watching you today at the dojo. You are tough, but you lack technique. That's holding you back, I said as I walked beside her. Get away from me, she said. Hey, I think you have a lot of potential, but if you keep going like this, you'll never get ahead. I murmured to her. Teeth. Her tongue clicked as she unsheathed her sword, but I only raised an eyebrow at her, and at this she began to walk faster. Didn't you say that I wanted to finish off Orsted? I muttered as a last option. This was effective as she stopped dead in her tracks and stood still in her spot. I'm going to kill Orsted, but I won't be able to if weaklings like you stop me, she declared angrily. Weak? I could cut you right here, miss, and goodbye. You say that, but I remember perfectly that I beat you in 2 hits, I said in a mocking tone, provoking her. This was effective because in a second she unsheathed her sword and lunged at me. She executed a perfect long sword of silence and threw it at my rib, which I effortlessly dodged. She seemed annoyed at this and continued to throw long swords of silence at me. I dodged each and every one, and I could see that Eris was starting to get tired. With a smooth movement I disarmed her and sent her sword flying until it buried itself about 20 meters away from her. Now come the fists. She threw a hook at my liver, but I intercepted her fist, knocked her off balance, and put my knee on her neck. She tried to struggle, but it was useless. Look at you now, Eris. You say you will defeat Orsted, but you can't defeat me. I can't defeat the sword god. The sword god can't defeat Orsted. Do you realize that? I said seriously while looking into her eyes. She looked at me with anger, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. I can help you, Eris. I see that potential in you, I said with a smile. I could see how Eris stopped struggling and her look of uncertainty grew bigger. So, what do you say? Will you let me help you with your training tomorrow? I said with a smile. She hesitated for a few moments but closed her eyes and nodded. You better hope I don't regret doing this, okay? She said. Calm down, I just want to help you, okay? I replied as I removed my knee from his neck. Eris slowly got up from the ground as she looked at me with doubt. I could see that bloodlust was no longer in his eyes and he was just sizing me up now. I could also notice the red marks on his neck from the pressure exerted. Oh, sorry, let me fix that, I said as I approached her and applied intermediate rank healing magic on her. She widened her eyes at this as she looked at me. You can do magic without chanting too? She murmured in surprise. Surprised? I developed it when I was a kid, I said with a smile. Eris just raised an eyebrow and went to pick up her sword. See you tomorrow then, she said in a calmer tone. I said goodbye to her and went back home. That went well, right? Chapter 30. Training the mad dog. That night I returned home as if nothing had happened. I realized the enormous difference between me and the other Gino. The poor idiot didn't even have time to react and Eris humiliatingly defeated him. I smiled to myself, satisfied with the enormous progress I had made in such a short time. When I got home, nothing relevant happened. I had a quiet dinner with my parents, I took a bath, and I fell asleep. I woke up the next day as if nothing had happened and went outside to jog. My title in the sacred land of the sword was already quite known, which is why the villagers looked at me with fear and respect. I followed my usual route. I ran for about 2 hours. I realized that even running at maximum speed I don't get tired. So I still have enough fuel left to have a close duel with my father. After having breakfast at home, I headed to the dojo. The weather was relaxing. It was winter, so a snowstorm caught me on the way. When I arrived at the dojo, it was covered in snow. Obviously, all the sword saints were there. Inside the dojo, so enter slowly. I shook the snow off my jacket and walked to where Gulfaran was. The sword saints were just arriving, including Nina. If I do the math, she must be barely having breakfast, but on the other hand, Eris was already doing her swings. There she was again. Her technique was great but too inefficient. "Good morning, Eris," I said with a smile as I approached her. She just looked at me out of the corner of her eye, but I no longer heard that click of her tongue. "Good progress." I looked at her for about 5 minutes and I could see the same mistakes as always. "Very good, Eris, I have already identified where you are failing," I told her. She stopped swaying and looked at me, waiting for me to speak again. I briefly explained to her what she was failing at. I even corrected her posture with my hands to give her a better example. The result was immediate. She quickly adapted to her new positions and continued with her swings. By this point, Nina had already returned and started training. She gave me a jealous look, so I had to clarify the situation for her. She didn't seem satisfied with this, so she stared at me the entire time I trained with Eris. I immediately realized his enormous potential, and his aggressiveness was a double-edged sword. At the end of the day, she had a small breakthrough. "Thank you," she murmured, but understood immediately that she didn't know my name. "My name is Gino," I told her, although I remembered introducing myself to her, or maybe it was just my imagination. "Thank you, Gino," she murmured as she looked at me. "No problem, it was a pleasure to help you," I said with a smile. "HMMP," she murmured as she crossed her arms, although I could notice a slight blush on her cheeks as she left for her guest room. To no one's surprise, Nina confronted me, totally jealous. "Why are you training that animal?" she said angrily. I could barely contain her in my embrace as she tried to struggle. "Don't worry, I don't have eyes for anyone else if you're worried, hee," I said with a mocking smile. Nina could only blush and look away. I don't mean that," she snapped. "It's just, I don't like her at all," she mumbled as she buried her face in my chest. "Don't worry, that can be avoided by simply ignoring her, and she doesn't seem like she has any intention of making friends," I told him. Nina lasted for a few moments, and shortly afterward she reciprocated my hug. "It's okay, but I don't want to see you flirting with her." "Not with her?" Nina murmured. "What do you mean by, not with her? What do you mean by that?" I told him without understanding. I noticed how you look at that woman, Ghislaine, and she seems like a person to respect," Nina murmured with her cheeks blushing. "Are you okay with that?" I murmured in disbelief. "As long as it's not Eris, and don't forget me," she said. I hugged her tighter at this. "I would never do it," I told her seriously, and she nodded with a smile. The days kept passing, and in the blink of an eye a whole month has passed since Eris arrived. I feel like I've become closer to her, since now she doesn't look at me like an annoying bug, if not more like the annoying guy in your class. This look brings back very bad memories, but what can I do? Eris's performance is improving. She is correcting her technique and posture quickly, although she is still not able to use a long sword of light. She has seemed really angry about this, but I can only tell her that she needs balance in her body and mind. And that's another point, her mind is always busy, too busy with various thoughts that dull her progress. Ghislaine, on the other hand, being a sword king, she can clear her mind and focus on her goal. I have not faced her, but it seems that she is almost as strong as me, Yes, I said almost. And it seems that Ghislaine's talent only took her to Sword King. It seems like she is stuck in her progress and I can't figure out why. Her posture and way of moving is perfect, she just doesn't move forward. I can say that she has simply reached her limit. It was already the year K420, we were in the first month of the year so we were still in winter. This day I decided to train outside as usual, this to clear my mind. I went out for a run, the cold consumed my body but my jog kept me warm. I jogged and ran for 2 hours until I returned home and trained with him. After that and having breakfast I went out into the forest to train alone. Obviously I had already warned Nina and Gull about all this beforehand and in fact it was already a habit of mine. I walked for a few minutes into the forest. My goal was the cliff overlooking the ocean. I had already made peace with my trauma with the black bear, so I could return here now. But to my surprise I heard a whistling sound in the air. It was a sword swinging. I walked a little and there was Eris. She was wearing sweatpants and a kind of sleeveless green shirt. Her short green hair was tied into her dead-end bandana. She noticed me immediately and stopped swinging. "What are you doing here?" she asked as she caught her breath. "That's what I'd like to ask you. I thought you'd be at the dojo," I replied. "I needed to clear my mind so I came here," she said as she started to do her swings again. I did the same while accompanying her, and after about 20 minutes she stopped to rest again. I was fine but I stopped anyway. "Hey, and why do you want to defeat Orsted?" I asked her while looking at her. "It's none of your business," she replied angrily. "Oh come on. There must be some reason." "Let me guess, revenge," I said while pointing my fingers at her. Eris stared at me but just crossed her arms. "I knew it." "What? Did he kill someone you care about?" I asked her cautiously. The grip on the handle of his sword became so strong that the palm of his hand turned pale, that bloodlust in his eyes returned as she looked at me. That bastard dragon god." Eris spat in anger. "That bastard almost killed someone very special to me, and I couldn't do anything," Eris muttered as tears welled up in her eyes. "I only survived on Orsted's whim. I felt so weak and helpless, so that's why. That's why I want to become stronger. And kill him," Eris said with determination in her eyes. I approached her and put a hand on her shoulder. "I see, so that's why you want to train so hard, huh?" I said with a smile. "Yeah. Any problem with that, idiot?" Eris said as she wiped away her tears. I gently caressed her shoulders as I looked at her with a smile. "No problem, I think it's a great motivation and that's why I want to help you," I said. Eris nodded as she looked at me and then looked at my hands on her shoulders and blushed a little. "Get your hands off me," she muttered. "I'm sorry," I said quickly as I stepped away from her and picked up my sword. I glanced at her and she was frowning as she touched her shoulder. How odd. As the days continued to pass, Eris began to relax around me, and when I praised her performance she would smile lightly only to realize her action and make a HMP noise and cross his arms while looking away. I also focused on training Nina, but she performed quite well considering her slight stagnation. I also helped her become Eris' training partner, which led to the two of them becoming rivals. This worried me a little at first, but when I saw that Nina no longer hated her I calmed down. And it seems that Gull appointed me as Eris's trainer. I don't know when it happened, but even I realized this after a long time. Ghislaine, on the other hand, she always stayed out of the situation. Most of the time she trains alone, or is it Gull Fairy's side? I asked Gull if he would allow me to have a duel with her and he agreed. Obviously I already knew what the consequence of my victory would be. I would become a sword emperor. The thought alone made me shudder. But even if I failed, even if she defeated me, I still had all the time in the world to keep training and beat her. So with this in mind I started training hard, day after day. My body developed and in the blink of an eye spring came and I turned 13 and Nina 16. And my birthday was the day my duel with Ghislaine was scheduled. If I won I would become a sword emperor. And if I lost, I would just have to try again, until I won. Chapter 31 Clash of Kings. It's day 15 of the 4th month of the year K421. Today, I just turned 13 years old, 13 years in this world. I have been a Sword King for 3 years since I crossed the barrier that some can only dream of crossing in their entire life. I had those examples in front of me daily. Sword Saints who remained stagnant in their rank due to their lack of talent or ambition. Most were in their 30s, and some were at the end of their lives. The youngest Sword Saint in the central dojo is currently Nina Feng, my cousin and fiancée. She is already 16 years old, and since a year ago she is already considered an adult in this world. She is by right the strongest Sword Saint in the dojo, but she is still light years away from the king rank. And it's been 5 months since Rudeus Greyrat arrived at the dojo. Recently, she was finally able to execute a perfect long sword of light after my body stabilization exercises and helping her swing the sword. She rewarded me with a bear hug that surely broke something inside me and that I could only heal with advanced healing magic. And on the other hand, she has become kinder to me, in part. I have to be careful with her so she doesn't want to hit me, although that's not a concern. Also, at this age I'm already 170 centimeters tall, which is the average height here, and I can now look down to see Nina and Eris. Leaving that aside, I have been training hard these past few months with one goal. In mind. Defeat Ghislaine de Doldia. Gull saw it in my eyes, and indeed that is the only way to advance to the Emperor rank, and so I dedicated myself to training. Even since they had just arrived at the dojo, Gull declared that I should already be stronger than her. His word should not be doubted in that regard, but even so, I should not be overconfident. I prefer a one-sided defeat to a close battle. And today was the day that I feel ready. Why? For the simple reason that I am already as fast as my father, just as strong, and I can fight him. He can no longer hold back with me. That is a sign, and I want to officially advance. That is why since the beginning of the year I proposed to Gull the idea of a duel against Ghislaine. He gave me the go-ahead and I chose this day for the duel. I woke up, went out to run as fast as I could, and covered the entire holy land of the sword in half an hour. I had the closest duel with my father so far. We ended up completely exhausted. My father had slight cuts all over his body. If my 8-year-old self could see this, he would never have believed it. My mother made a special stew for breakfast, and I ate until I was full. I went out to the holy land of the sword with my Dragon Phoenix sword on my waist. I almost never used it since I trained most of the time with wooden swords, but today was a special day. It was approximately 7 in the morning, the sun was just coming up, the cold spring air filled my nose and filled me with energy, and the snowy pines reflected the sunlight on the snow, which gave a beautiful air to the place, a place as beautiful as it was deadly. At the entrance of the dojo was Nina. She had a ponytail, a brown leather jacket, and black leather pants. She was leaning on the entrance while looking at me with a smile. "Are you ready?" she asked as she approached me and hugged me. "Yes, who's inside?" I asked as I looked at her with my own smile. "Dad, Miss Ghislaine, and Eris. The other saints are just arriving," she said as she gave me a kiss on the cheek. I continued to hug her for a few moments and then let go to enter the dojo. I opened the sliding door and was greeted by the image of Gull lying on his pillow while staring at me. Next to him was Ghislaine. Her imposing body to others was sexier to me. She was looking at me seriously, her ears were erect and her tail was down but swaying slightly. Eris was in a corner doing her swings, unfazed by the current situation. I also counted around 6 sword saints who were beginning their training, equally ignorant of the situation. Nina entered behind her and walked towards Eris. It was already customary to see the two of them training. "So Gino? Are you ready?" Gull said with a smile. "Yes," I answered as I turned to look at Ghislaine. "Please accept a duel against me," I said, bowing to her. She smiled as she looked at me. "All right, I accept," she said as she started walking to the right side of the dojo. The saints who had arrived noticed the situation and sat in a half circle to watch us. I could see that even Nina and Eris were staring at us. "All right, attack on my signal," Gull said as he sat upright on his cushion. Ghislaine and I were 20 steps away from each other. We both unsheathed our swords at the same time and got into a combat stance. I got into my usual stance and I could see that Ghislaine did the same, but I could see something. She hunched over, bent her knees too much, and held her sword with only one hand, and it was at the height of her neck. She was in a position to throw a long sword of light immediately. Her yellow eyes were looking at me intensely, analyzing every move I could make. I simply smiled. I put on my best smile as I looked at her. She raised an eyebrow as she looked at me. I could see her clench her crotch as she breathed deeply. "All right, begin," Gull shouted. Ghislaine unfolded her legs like a spring and jumped towards me, her sword with the blunt side at her neck. She made a half-circle movement towards my chest. How slow? No. She wasn't slow, she was fast as you could expect from a sword king. But, oh shit, how could I not realize it before? I could see her movement in almost slow motion. I should have known that already, right? Every morning I face a sword emperor on equal terms. Ghislaine is very, very strong, but my father is on another level, and I'm fighting my father. If I had faced Ghislaine the day she arrived, it might have been a closer fight. But not now. I had trained for almost half a year. I had become infinitely stronger than at that time. With a precise movement, I moved to the right and crouched slightly. Her sword grazed my head, cutting a couple of strands of hair. Her chest was exposed. I could finish her off right here. I looked at Gull and he raised an eyebrow in response. I moved my sword so that the blunt side hit her, and I executed a long sword of light. The attack ripped her from shoulder to rib, and she shot towards where the sword saints were with a dull sound. All this happened in just 2 seconds. I was still in my attack position while staring at her. Nina and Eris looked at me with wide eyes, and Gull looked at me with a shark-toothed smile. It was almost like a grimace, as if he had already expected this result. Ghislaine slowly got up from the ground while breathing heavily. A red line formed on her chest. It looked like a huge scratch, but there was no puncture. She was breathing heavily as she looked at me. We stayed silent for a moment and she finally smiled, letting out a sigh. "I surrender," she said with a smile. The saints who were here burst into a round of applause, and both Ghislaine and I sheathed our swords. I looked at Gull and he was looking at me with a smile. "Who would have thought, huh?" he muttered as he lifted her off her cushion. "Did you see her movements, Ghislaine?" Gull said as he looked at the beast woman. "No, I couldn't see them," she said seriously. "Well, that's impressive." "Heh," Gull muttered as his smile grew bigger. Well, it seems my dear son-in-law has come this far, huh?" Gull muttered. "Dad," Nina complained, blushing brightly from the other side of the room. Gull just shook his head as he smiled at me. "Then, Gullfang, sword god, appoint you Genobritzes, sword emperor," he said as he sat upright on his cushion. I bowed in respect as I didn't want him to see my huge smile. I also looked at Ghislaine and bowed in respect as well. "Well, what are you going to do now?" "If you want to advance, then you'll have to beat me," Gull said as he frowned and grabbed the hilt of his sword. I just smiled at this as I looked at him. "Not for now, sir. I want to learn other sword styles," I said in a combination of mockery and serious tone. Gull's eyes widened and he let out a huge laugh. "Haha, of course. That's why I like you so much, kid, huh?" He laughed carefree. Amazingly, the day after that step, my training proceeded as normal, and when I sat down next to Gull, he moved my seat 1 step higher. I also noticed that Ghislaine looked at me with new eyes. In them there was a deep respect, and I almost forgot that the Didoldia respect strength above all else. So it made sense. Nina congratulated me with a deep kiss and Eris just gave me a thumbs up. Although it was enough for her to show me her respect. That was a good day, and Gull also took my advice about studying other styles, as he told me that he had written letters to 2 very powerful swordsmen of the Water God and North God styles. Obviously, I already knew that Aaron Rida and Aubert were coming to train Eris, but Gull also allowed me to train with those 2. I already knew that my training had no end. It had only just begun. My idea of venturing out into the world would have to wait, I suppose. Chapter 32 Changing Destinies. The day ended on a good note. After my duel with Ghislaine, I continued training as if nothing had happened, despite the fact that I was already a sword emperor. And I'm only 13 years old. After leaving the dojo, I went straight home and gave the news to my parents. Needless to say, Mom was in shock, but Dad was already expecting it. "Do you think I didn't notice after those morning workouts?" he said, although it was true, but at least he had the decency to congratulate me. I also announced that I wanted to study other styles of the sword, and they supported me. Now I'm just lying in my room going over the events of the day. I haven't even had my 3rd birthday yet, and I'm already a sword emperor. I muttered to myself, feeling a huge smile forming on my lips. I couldn't contain my excitement, and I rolled around in bed while I stifled a cry of excitement into my pillow. So many years, and so much effort, have given me these fruits, this strength. I finally managed to calm myself down and fell asleep with a smile on my lips. Tomorrow would be my first day as Sword Emperor. I opened my eyes and I was in that fucking white room. "You have to be fucking kidding me, asshole," I said angrily to the faceless being in front of me. However, Hidegami did not answer me. I tried to read his expression, but he was serious. Sigh. Gino, you definitely have the strongest destiny I've ever seen," Hidegami muttered as he crossed his arms. I raised an eyebrow at this as I looked at him. "You already told me that the last time we saw each other," I murmured. "Yes, I did say it, but now it's true," he declared. My expression formed in pure confusion as I looked at him. "So, what do you mean?" I murmured. "I told you before that you changed the fates of the people around you, and that includes everyone, even Eris Boreas Greyrat and Ghislaine Didoldia," he said. I felt my mouth open and close like a fish in water as I looked at the bastard in white. "Can you be more specific?" I said with frustration. Hidegami sighed in exasperation and sat on the floor looking directly at me. "Eris Boreas Greyrat. From the moment she interacted with you, her strong destiny with Rudeus Greyrat began to crack, and it grows more fragile with each passing day," he said boredly. What do you mean it gets weaker? What do you mean?" I said in shock. "And that fragile fate with Rudeus Greyrat began to become an increasingly stronger fate with you," he declared, ignoring me. I could only look at him in disbelief. How is that possible?" I said in panic. "This is bad. I had no idea." "Why would that be bad? You should do it even with that damn niggard Roxy Migurdia," Hidegami shouted in anger as he got up from the ground. So there's no way to stop it?" I muttered in fear. "And nope. These few months were enough to turn the fate of Eris Boreas Greyrat and Rudeus Greyrat into something even more fragile as long as you are near her," he said excitedly. Sigh. "And that doesn't matter to you, right?" I murmured as I looked at the white floor. "Not at all. I already told you it would be better if you did it with Roxy Migurdia." He spat with disdain. And what about Ghislaine Didoldia?" I murmured. "Oh, her? Well, she didn't have a particularly strong destiny with anyone actually, but a pretty strong destiny has formed between you and her," he said, downplaying it. I couldn't even form a smile at this. It was something I wanted, but I didn't want Eris. "Come on, don't be so sad. In a short time the water god and Aubert Corvette will arrive here," he declared. "And how does that benefit me?" I muttered. "It's not that you don't want to be stronger, but you still need to fulfill your part of the deal. Roxy Migurdia is currently heading to Bigarret," he said excitedly. "Then I have to intercept her in the labyrinth?" I muttered. "Correct, my dear friend," he said, clapping his hands. "We are not friends, and there is still time for that," I said angrily. Yes, certainly. I will come to see you in a year, my friend. That will be the time to leave. You can make your life and get ready to leave. And don't worry. Once you have Roxy Migurdia, I won't bother you or Rudeus Greyrat and his family again," he declared in a playful tone with a malevolent smile. "You know I've never trusted you, right?" I said with disdain. I couldn't care less about that, but we already have a deal and you must honor it. Hidegami said irritably. I looked at the ground analyzing the null options I had. Don't let me know at the last minute, just do it a month before I have to leave, I said with resignation. Okay, I'll see you later then. Hidegami said excitedly. I immediately felt a force pulling me back and I woke up instantly. I woke up agitated and with my back in a pool of sweat. It was honestly unpleasant. I took a cold bath to calm my nerves. There wasn't much I could do about my situation. I was practically hanging by a thread. I was at the mercy of that bastard Hidegami, and that is fucking humiliating. I'm already a sword emperor, but with my current strength I couldn't take on the heavyweights of Hidegami's apostles. I also only have 1 year left to train. I have to tell my parents? After my morning workout and training with my father, I went home to have breakfast. It was time to tell my idea. Good morning, dear. Breakfast is almost ready. Sit down, Mom said while cooking. I obediently sat at the kitchen table and my father sat across from me. We were both out of breath and had some bruises but nothing serious. Okay, here it is, enjoy it, dear, Mom said as she served me my plate of food. Thanks, Mom, I said excitedly and instantly began to devour my food. It was a nice breakfast, a sort of combination of chickpeas and rice from Bigaret with beans and eggs from a local bird. It wasn't the best in the world, but it wasn't inedible either. Needless to say, I finished my meal in less than 2 minutes. It was time. Dad, do you remember the promise we made when I turned 12? I murmured. Yes, but you are already 13. Why did you wait so long? My dad said as he finished his meal. Well, I wanted to wait to finish my training, and besides, yesterday I became Sword Emperor. I explained to him while staring at him. My father raised an eyebrow and put a hand on his chin in a thoughtful position. It's true, you have exceeded all of our expectations and at such a young age, and it would be hypocritical of me not to allow you to go. After all, you have enough strength to take care of yourself. Dad said with a smile. Yes, that's the point. I don't want to leave right away, but maybe today in a year? I murmured. My mom looked worried and Dad raised an eyebrow. Why a year? I thought you were eager to get out into the world. Dad muttered in bewilderment. Don't you think it's a little early, Gino? Mom murmured sadly. Well, I heard from the sword god that Rita Rhea and a North Emperor would be coming and I want to train with them. I muttered. I see. That's surprising, Gino. In a year then, Dad said, ending the conversation. Wait a minute, Tim. Gino hasn't even come of age yet, and you want to let him wander around the world? Mom protested. Dad crossed his arms as he looked at her. How many powerful people like him do you know? Besides, I remember that he said it would only be a couple of months, right? Dad said while looking at me out of the corner of his eye. Yes, 6 months at most. I exclaimed. Mom put on a complicated expression as she exchanged glances between me and Dad. In the end she closed her eyes and sighed deeply. So just 6 months? You promise, Gino? Mom said with a frown. I promise, I said with a bow. Okay, she murmured, so I stood up from my seat and hugged her tightly. This made her mood improve noticeably. So within a year I would set off to find Roxy? Eris POV. The day I faced the dragon god together with Rudy was the scariest day of my life so far. I felt so helpless, so weak. I saw how the man I love was almost killed in front of my eyes and I couldn't do anything. And when we returned to Roa and I found out about my parents' death, I was devastated. So I made a promise to myself. I would part ways with Rudeus to train, and then when we meet again we can defeat Orsted together. Those were the words I kept in my head throughout the entire trip to the sacred land of the sword. It was 2 months of travel. It was like a walk in the park compared to the demon continent. And so after a long time I arrived at the central dojo. I made my way through the swordsmen there. My goal was to challenge the god of the sword to train me. However, the bastard bothered me and made me fight with a girl I didn't know. I defeated her easily obviously, but my next opponent was Gino Britz's, a name I will never forget. He's attractive, was the first thing I thought. No, besides that, he's strong as Ghislaine or stronger. I tried to intimidate him, but he smiled at me like a maniac, which made me shudder, so without hesitation I lunged at him. He defeated me, he easily disarmed me. I tried to hit him, but he effortlessly dodged me and knocked me out. When I woke up I was in a guest room at the dojo. I had been accepted and promoted to Sword Saint, but I was frustrated. Shortly after I learned that this boy who is 3 years younger than me was already a Sword King. Months passed and he offered to train me. I don't know why, but every time I see him, my heart races and I get nervous. This shouldn't happen, not with him. The only one I love is Rudeus, but when I see him, I feel confused. What should I do? Chapter 33 Reincarnated. The sacred land of the sword, at the far west of the Northern Territories, was in a land that had seen many battles. Currently, it was the home of the sword god style, but there was once a time when the water god style held sway here. Just a century ago, the leaders of the two styles had dueled here, and the water god had won the shrine from its owner. That water god was later defeated by another sword god, and lost the shrine in turn, but since then, it had belonged to the strongest swordsman of each successive generation, who earned the right to teach those of his school here. Students who secured a place at the shrine were tutored by the best teacher possible and had the opportunity to dethrone him as the strongest. This fact attracted many ambitious young swordsmen to this cold, isolated place, if only to see it with their own eyes. However, at this moment, two visitors of a more unusual sort were approaching her main hall. One of them was an older woman, perhaps in her 60s. The expression on her face suggested that she was something of a curmudgeon. Otherwise, she was the picture of a kindly, harmless old woman. She was dressed for the road at the moment, but it was easy to imagine her in more casual clothes, reclining in an armchair while knitting some thread. Only one detail seemed incongruous. The old woman wore a slightly shortened sword at her hip. Furthermore, a particularly skilled swordsman might have seen that her relaxed demeanor was just a facade and that even his quickest attacks would fail to touch her. But enough of that. The woman's name was Reincarnated, and she was the reigning water goddess. She had perfected the ultimate technique of her style, the blade of deprivation, and was among the strongest warriors of this generation. Accompanying Rida was a young woman about 20 years old whose face bore some resemblance to hers. Her name was Iseult Cruel, and she was dressed for the road and carried a sword on her hip. "This is the aforementioned sword shrine, Master Rida?" Iseult asked Rida. "That's right, my dear. Take a good long look. This is the beast lair you've been so eager to visit all these years," Rida replied with a smile. "Okay, now I'm getting nervous," she replied with a shrug. "Have a little confidence in your abilities. Unless you're up against the sword god, you'll manage just fine," Rida replied. "Thank you, Master Rida," Iseult replied, regaining her spirits. Speaking quietly to each other, the two set foot in the sword shrine. At a glance, this sacred place looked like an ordinary town. There was an inn, a weapons shop, and an adventurer's guild, and on the streets were the usual adventurers and merchants, who went about their business doing their own errands. However, there was something unusual about this town. Practically everyone who resided here was a trained member of the sword god style. In this place, a slender villager was sometimes stronger than the most corpulent of adventurers. "Should we take a room at the inn first?" Iseult asked. "That won't be necessary, we'll stay at Gull's house," Rida said. Rida walked forward with a firm step, heading to the edge of the town. After a certain point, adventurers and merchants became less common, and they began to come across more people wearing martial arts uniforms and carrying wooden swords. At the same time, shops gave way to training rooms. Iseult looked at all of this with obvious curiosity. In particular, she seemed intrigued by the fine uniforms that everyone wore, despite the biting cold. "Master Rida, everyone is going very fast here, considering how cold it is," Iseult muttered while rubbing her arms. "Well, People of the sword god style have to go with a zipper in combat or they are easy targets. They don't like to wear anything that slows them down, no matter how cold it is, Raida explained. That's exactly the opposite of us. We bundle up even when it's hot, right? How curious! Iseult said, visibly dismayed. There's nothing curious about it if you ask me, Raida replied boredly. Without sparing even a glance at the various training rooms, Raida continued forward. In no time, the houses, training rooms, and uniformed rookies disappeared completely. The only thing ahead of them was a vast plain of snow with the only road running through it like a valley. At the end of that road was a sizable building surrounded by a wall. That was the central dojo, the core of the sacred land of the sword. Just as Raida and Iseult reached the entrance of the dojo, a young woman with dark blue hair happened to come out from inside. The woman had a strong and dignified face, large breasts, and wore her long blue hair in a ponytail. Judging by the bucket of water she was carrying in her hand, she was heading to draw water from a well. However, upon seeing Raida, she puts aside the bucket and puts her hand on the hilt of her sword. What business do you have in our hall, madam? Nina asked suspiciously. Raida studied the young woman's face carefully, and after a moment, the sullen expression on her face softened significantly. Oh wow, is that you, Nina? Look how big you've gotten, Raida said with a smile. Nina looked at her doubtfully, keeping her hand on the hilt of her sword. Ah, you don't remember me, do you? Well, I guess that makes sense. I was just a baby the last time I was here, Raida said in a nostalgic tone, but for Nina, she had no memory of this woman. The only thing she was sure of was that the old lady was a fearsome threat. The girl beside her was not far behind either. Nina felt that she was at least on her level. Well, I'm here because your boss called me, dear. Would you mind taking me to him? Raida said with a smile. My boss? Nina asked without understanding. Yes, Gulfaran, Raida answered without flinching. Nina hesitated at these words. Many came to this place looking to meet Gulfaran, but most of them were complete fools who had convinced themselves that they could strip him of his title. Driving such people away was one of the assigned responsibilities of Nina and her boyfriend Gino. First, would you be so kind as to tell me your name? Nina asked cautiously. I'm Raida Rhea, no need to explain myself, right? She said with an old lady smile. My apologies, please come this way, Nina replied. The instant Nina heard the old lady's name, Nina bowed to her respectfully and invited her into the dojo. Only one person in the world could introduce herself as Raida Rhea. It was a name reserved for the leader of the water god style. No one else was allowed to claim it. Raida and her companion followed Nina into the dojo. Nina led them straight to the main hall, which they had to climb to enter, something common as in most buildings in this snowy region. At the entrance, they stopped to brush the snow off their clothes and then continued down the creaking wooden hallway. Watching Nina from behind as she walked, Raida spoke in a thoughtful voice. I must say, my dear, that you are very smart for your age and well educated at that. Have you already reached the Sword King level? No. I'm afraid I still have a long way to go, Nina said with a smile. Now yes, I'm sure you are the strongest of the young people at least. There's no need to be too modest, Raida asked, raising an eyebrow. Actually not yet? She murmured. Oh, that's a good attitude you have, my dear. It's a shame that other young people of your style aren't like you. Raida praised her and Nina could only sigh. As they spoke, the three of them had arrived at the central hall of the dojo. A single man sat in it, his eyes closed, as if he were meditating, yet the mere sight of him made Raida feel as if a sword was at her throat. Raida Rhea, despite her advanced age, did not feel any less powerful than in her prime. She could stop any sword effortlessly. But Gul was the only exception to that rule. Father, I brought Raida Rhea to see you, she said with a bow. Ah, you're here, Gul said, opening his eyes slightly. Thank you for coming here, Raida. It must not have been easy with those old and tired bones of yours, I'm sure, Gul said with a smile. It certainly wasn't. Still, It's not every day you come to ask me for a favor, right? I guess you've piqued my curiosity, oof. Rida replied with a snort. Rida sat in front of Gull and Isolt and Nina behind her in a sign of humility. So, who am I going to teach what? Do you want me to teach Nina the secret techniques of the water god or something? Rida said, raising her chin. She seems like a girl who knows how to listen. She may be a sword god type by nature, but I'm sure I could get a few of the water god skills into her head as well, Rida said as she looked at Nina. The letter that brought Rida to this land had been short. In essence, it only said, I want you to come train one of my students. Rida was about to tear it to pieces as soon as she read those words, and yet she found it intriguing that Gul Faran had bothered to write her a letter of any kind. The man hated asking anyone for anything. However, that was not the only reason she had come. Mere curiosity would not have been enough to make her walk here from the capital of the Azura Kingdom. In any case, I have a condition, Rida said firmly. What is it? Gul Faran said in a bored tone. You want me to teach some things to one of your students, right? Well, I want you to teach one of mine the sword god style, although you don't need to actually teach him, Rida declared. Oh, is that all? Of course it is, Gul said surprised. Hee, you know, we could even pit my star pupil against yours if you want, Rida said with a smile. My star pupil is almost as fast as me. That girl won't stand a chance, Gul declared. Rida was shocked at this, but before she could speak, Gul interrupted her. Although I also want you to teach him, I didn't call you mainly for him, Nina. Go find Eris for me, Gul replied. Yes, father, she replied, getting up from the floor. However, upon hearing these words, Rida tilted his head in curiosity. Ever since he met the girl at the entrance of the compound, he had assumed that Nina was the student he had come to teach. Father, Nina said. What is it? Hurry up, child. Gul responded by raising an eyebrow. I was hoping you would give me a chance to spar with our visitor as well, Nina murmured. I'm very interested in seeing what the water god style can do, she continued. That was always part of the plan. Gul said boredly, Oh, thank you. I'll go find Eris right away. A look of happiness and relief briefly crossed Nina's face before she hurriedly left the room. As soon as Nina left the room, Rida looked back at Gul with curiosity. Who do you mean your star student? I thought it would be Nina? Rida asked. My son-in-law Gino, he is barely 13 years old and he is already a sword emperor, Gul said with a smile. Rida could only look at him in shock. She had already heard the rumor of a child who had reached the rank of a holy sword. She ignored it due to the unbelievable nature of the matter, but now she heard it from Gul's words. If that was so, Rida had no doubt that she could witness the next sword god. Chapter 34. You're a beginner again. The cold spring air fills my lungs and gives me energy. A whistling sound is heard in the air. My wooden sword perfectly cuts through the air, creating a light column of air on the ground, which raises dust and snow. It's been a month since Hitagami's last visit. We're now in mid-spring, and I've continued with my training as Sword Emperor. Apart from that, there hasn't been any notable moments so far. Regarding Eris and Ghislaine, since that day, I have limited myself to simply training Eris and guiding her in what is wrong. On the other hand, with Ghislaine I feel that I have become closer to her. Now I could consider myself a friend of hers, and in addition, she treats me with a lot of respect since I defeated her. It was no joke that the Didoldia respects strength. Also, she gets anxious when she sees me, as if she wanted to tell me something but refrained. I guess I'll wait until her mating season. Ijajage? After a whole hour of swinging, I take my well-deserved rest. Today was one of the days when I train outside. The view of the sea from this cliff is just as impressive as always. I guess it's time to head back. I muttered to myself. I didn't know why, but I already wanted to go back. It was just a little over noon and I was already returning. Then I'll return to the dojo. I spoke in a low voice as I walked through the forest. The trip back to the dojo was quick, considering I jogged all the way back, but I still had energy left. I could see some sword saints training at the entrance and they greeted me respectfully when they saw me. And it is that me, Dad, and Samuel, we are the only sword emperors in the world. It is a title that certainly evokes a lot of respect. With my wooden sword in one hand and the phoenix dragon on my waist, I entered the dojo quickly. I'm back, yes. I muttered looking at Gulfaran only to be left in shock. Next to Gul was an old woman of about 60 years old. On the ground were Eris and a woman with pale blue hair, and in the middle of them was Nina, who was out of breath. Nina looked at me and smiled, but I could only stare in amazement at the scene before me. So, this is it? The old woman murmured. No, this is not just any old lady, it's Rida Rhea. Vite alla verga. Yes, my son-in-law and star student, Gul said with a smile. Rida raised an eyebrow and looked me up and down. Gul, what happened here? I muttered as I walked towards him. Oh yes, this wrinkled old lady here is the water god Rida Rhea. She looks old and is in her later years, but that doesn't make her any less powerful, Gul said with a mocking smile, and Rida grunted grumpily at this. Nice to meet you, I said, bowing in respect. He was silent for a few moments and then looked at the woman lying on the ground. Could you be so kind as to explain to me what happened here? I muttered. Ah yes, Rida is coming to train you, Nina and Eris, and I will train that girl instead. What is her name? Gul murmured. Iseult, Rida replied dryly. Yes, she did. And what happened is that they had a test match. Iseult defeated Eris and Nina defeated Iseult, Gul explained. I looked at Nina and nodded, and she smiled at me, blushing. I see, I said as I helped Eris up. So this is your star student, huh? And I noticed that you also called him son-in-law. Rida muttered while looking at Gul with a raised eyebrow. Ah yes, that's it, my daughter and he are in a relationship and they have my blessing. It's nothing out of this world, Gul explained broadly. Rida looked at me with, and I could see a growing interest in her. I see, and you say he's already a sword emperor? She murmured. Yeah, it was a month ago actually. Surprising, huh? Gul said with a mocking smile. Would you mind if I try out his skills? Rida said. Okay, but the kid is almost as strong as me. Don't get too confident, Gul said with a smile, and Rida looked at him with a raised eyebrow. By this point, Eris and Iseult were already leaning against a wall with the help of Nina. Laughing, she walked towards the center of the building while looking at me and then unsheathed her sword. The pommel of the sword was golden in color, as was the edge of the steel blade. I unsheathed my own sword in the same way and got into an attack position. There was a moment of silence between us before she raised an eyebrow. Well, you're not going to make this old lady move first, are you? Rida asked. You want me to teach you some techniques of the water god, right? You have to attack so I can show them to you and see if you're fit for this style, Rida declared solemnly. Wait. Sorry, I said as I concentrated my tuki on my legs, letting the sky explode as I jumped forward, my sword pointing at Rida's right arm. A slight surprised face appeared on Rida's face and a mysterious energy was generated in front of her, like some kind of mirror. And as soon as I reached that screen, there was a crash. I was stopped. No. My speed slowed down, but I kept moving forward. I could see a face of shock flooding Rida, my sword slowly advancing to his wrist. And Rida muttered with effort, and when my wooden sword was only centimeters away from her hand, everything was reversed. My sword, my tuki, my body. I flew backward before I could realize what had happened. A deep cut on my wrist, right where I was aiming at Rida. Blood quickly came out of my arm while covering my hand. What the fuck? That brat was the ocean mirror, she said while sweat came out of her forehead. It's like trying to walk between the waves of a beach. Everything comes back to you and makes you do somersaults no matter how much you try to fight against it. Pretty cool, huh? That's one of the 5 secret techniques of the god of water, although it almost passed my defense. Gul certainly doesn't brag, huh? Rida said as she looked at me curiously, but I only felt the enormous pain in my wrist. It almost touched the tendon and the floor was dirty with my blood. At this point, Nina was already by my side and bandaged my wound. But Mrs. Rida, should I really be showing these secret techniques right here? I asked as Nina healed my hand. No problem, Gull is a water emperor, he definitely knows all that, so there is no need for there to be any secrets between us, she said without taking it seriously. Yes. Gull is emperor in God of Water and North, no problem. Come on boy. This time you don't need to move, so watch carefully, she said, and so, following her exact words, I watched intently. A wave of Tuki flowed towards me as she created a ring around me. I didn't quite understand it, but when I stood up to move, I felt it. I was slower, a lot slower, and I could feel it. If this was a serious fight and not a training, I'd be dead already. The Tuki barrier? One that affects me physically? That seemed useful, if a bit passive. You got it? Rida asked, waving her sword as the Tuki dissipated into the air. That's Rainfall Waltz, like a downpour. It surrounds your opponents and ends the fight as soon as you catch them. After all, no matter how fast you are, you can't dodge the rain, right? Rida said with a smile. I got it. I nodded and Nina moved out of the way. She had gotten better at bandaging wounds, that's for sure. All right, this is Churning Tide. It absorbs power and Tuki in one hit before cycling it, amplifying it through the user's sword before returning it to the initial attacker, so needless to say, unless you don't want to die, don't attack me too hard, Rida said in a sarcastic tone. All right, I said, readying my sword and then taking a deep breath. I took a step forward, closing the distance in an instant as I lunged towards her sword. Our swords clashed. I felt my momentum stop as my Tuki drained from my sword, Tuki flooding into its blade, thrashing and twisting along its blade before gathering at the tip, and in an instant, I felt a pain in my chest as I was sent flying backward for the second time, falling backward as blood sprayed through the air. Shit, I haven't been hit this hard since my father sliced my chest. Gino! Nina cried out in worry as she went to help me. I looked at my wound and it was a little smaller than the one my father gave me, but that didn't mean it was small. I'm okay, I said as I felt the blood fall to my stomach. And I told you not to attack so hard, you dumb brat, Rida said, kicking my rib. I gritted my teeth at the overwhelming pain and saw that Nina had already left to get more bandages while Eris looked at me with concern and Isolt looked at me in amazement. Did you feel it? Rida said while looking at me with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, my Tuki was drained and it reflected like a mirror. I muttered while covering my wound. Heh, you have talent, kid. Are you sure you want to learn the techniques of the water god? With your power you can already defeat an emperor in my style, Rida said while looking at me. Yeah, I would like that. Otherwise I would retire Gull early, I said with a grimace of a smile from the pain. I heard that, brat. You better teach him, Rida. Gull said irritatedly. Don't be a crybaby, Gull. It's okay, child. From today you are a beginner of the water god style, Rida responded, and I bowed in respect while still on the ground. Chapter 35. Back to training hard. The day had passed naturally. Rida hurt my chest and wrist, so I returned home bandaged and was bombarded with questions by my mother. I also mentioned to my dad that I would start training in the water god style from now on. Okay, but don't neglect the sword god style for any reason, he said seriously. Obviously I had no plans to do so, but it didn't hurt to reaffirm it. In addition to that, I lightly healed my wounds with intermediate level magic. A layer of pink skin formed on the wounds, but it will take about 2 weeks for me to fully recover and it will leave a scar. The next day after that I continued with my normal morning training, had a duel with Dad, had breakfast and went out to the dojo. I arrived quickly and there were Nina, Isolt and Eris. I was surprised to see that the three of them were talking together. Good morning, Gino, Nina said as she approached me. I greeted her back and approached the other women. Hello, Gino, Eris murmured while looking slightly anxious. I smiled at her and looked at Isolt. We haven't introduced ourselves. What's your name? I said, feigning ignorance. Hey, my name is Isolt Cruel, Water King, she proudly proclaimed. I nodded at this as I glanced sideways at Eris and Nina. both of whom rolled their eyes as they looked at her. Where is Miss Rida? I asked. Teacher is having breakfast with Lord Sword God, Iseult explained. I see, she won't be long coming, right? I murmured. It shouldn't be, but I'm afraid we won't be training here. After all, this is the central dojo of the Sword God style, Iseult reaffirmed. Oh, I see, where does she have it planned then? I muttered. Well, actually, my teacher won't stay with me, so she asked me to teach you the techniques as far as I know them, and that's why she gave you that demonstration yesterday? Iseult muttered as she scratched her neck nervously. I see, that's a shame, I muttered as I saw that Nina also looked discouraged, but Eris didn't pay attention to it. But in that case, I guess we'll have to learn from a water king, right? I muttered to lighten the mood. Iseult looked at me and smiled. Of course. But let me tell you, I won't be kind to you. You may be a sword emperor, but you don't know anything about the water god style, Iseult said in a proud tone. I smiled at this and bowed in respect. I see, then I'm waiting for you to teach me, please, I said. At this, Iseult nodded, pleased. Gino, you are already a beginner of the water god style, so let me tell you the requirements to advance in rank. She muttered, laughing as I sat in the snow between Nina and Eris, Iseult standing behind us as the most experienced in the field. But first you must know one rule, and that is that from now on you stop calling her Mrs. Laughter, call her teacher, and this goes for you too, Laughter said while looking at Nina and Eris. Understood, teacher, I said, nodding. Laughing, she nodded to herself, pleased, and looked back at us. Very well. To be an intermediate of the water god style, you must be able to repel the third basic step of an attacker of the sword god style. To be advanced level, you must be perfectly capable of repelling a long sword of silence. To be saint level, you must be able to effectively apply flow to your sword and thus repel a long sword of light. And to advance from that level, you must master one of the 5 secret techniques of the water god style. If you master one, you will be a king rank. 2 will be emperor rank, and with 3 you will already be fully entitled to claim the title of Rida Rhea, Rida explained as she walked in circles in front of us. I nodded at this explanation as I looked at her. But let it be clear to you that it is not like repelling an attack as you are used to. It is an art of applying your tuki to your sword and undoing and returning an attack, Rida clarified while speaking seriously. I felt this again as I looked at her. Very well, Eris and Iseult, stand up, you will give us a demonstration, Rida said. I heard a growl of anger from Eris, and Iseult made a mocking smile. Nina took advantage of this to sit closer to me, and I was looking intently at the 2 women. Both of them got into a combat stance. Eris had left that wild attack stance and had relaxed her impulsive behavior, but that would not be enough. Iseult, on the other hand, she was standing straight as a log, her legs were slightly spread forming an increment, her sword was slightly tilted to the left. Other than that, she didn't make any other movement. Eris, on the other hand, bent her knees and put the blunt side of her sword on her neck, ready to throw a long sword of light at any moment. Very well, begin, Rida said, and immediately Eris threw a long sword of light at Iseult. I could see the whole process. It was a perfectly executed long sword of light. His body was stable and there was no extra pressure on any of his arms. The attack was launched at high speed at Iseult. I couldn't understand the process, but Iseult's sword was filled with a kind of aura and the long sword of light was repelled and dissipated. Nina and I were totally shocked at this, and Eris just groaned in frustration again. What you saw there was the technique flow, Rida explained. But don't get excited, it will take a long time before you get to that level, she continued. Shit, a demonic eye would be the best in these cases. I can't understand the Tuki's form, so it will take me more time to figure out how the technique works. For now, you will concentrate on manipulating your Tuki to be able to cleanly repel an attack. The stronger your control becomes, the more powerful the attacks you will be able to repel will be, Rida said as she looked at us. I don't expect huge control in a short time. If you can reach the advanced rank in about 3 years, then you are talented, she declared. I frowned at this instinctively. I didn't have 3 years to practice with my impending departure in a year. I looked at Nina and she had a complicated face. She was probably wondering if she was suitable for this style. She had nothing to lose by trying, but it would be depressing if she couldn't make any significant progress. The training session was summed up as Iseult beating Eris, Nina beating Iseult, and me beating Nina. It wasn't anything out of this world, and I don't have a clear idea of how to manipulate my Tuki in such a way to repel such a complex attack, and I don't have the time to learn it normally either. Now that I realize it, I don't know if I'll be able to learn too much in just 1 year, although if I at least reach advanced rank this year it will be progress. And so ended my first day of training in the water god style. It wasn't much since it was obviously the first day, but I could already get a general idea of how things were going. Also, Rida can't stay too long, so in about 2 days she will return to Azura, and so our training will be in Iseult's hands. And with all this said, our first day of training ended. Iseult and Rida, they returned to Gull's house, and Eris was left training alone. After trying to convince her to do it, she agreed to just do swings. And so it was just me and Nina who were left alone. It was 4 in the afternoon, but neither of us wanted to return to our respective houses. "Hey Gino," Nina murmured, blushing as she held my hand. "Do you want to go to the hot springs to relax?" she murmured as the grip on my hand tightened. To my surprise, not more than 2 years ago I discovered that in this place there are hot springs. If you walk further north from where the central dojo is, you will find another forest, and in the middle of it there are hot springs, consequence of some kind of inactive volcano. The best thing is that the waters are always in a warm and constant flow, and the best thing is that it is not a very well-known place. So people can have a lot of privacy if they go there. Naturally, I accepted Nina's proposal immediately. And so we went naked into the hot springs. Nina was shy the whole time, and even more so when I started to touch her. She complained weakly but never objected. The part one touched the most was obviously her tits. They were already quite big for her age, and I had already marked them as mine on many occasions, and today was no exception. But our private moment was interrupted when Ghislaine arrived. Needless to say, Nina gave me a sideways glance as I got hard in front of that angelic brown-skinned figure. "I didn't know you guys were here. Should I come back another time?" she murmured, blushing slightly. "No. We were just leaving," Nina replied as she climbed out of the water, only to shiver from the cold as she emerged naked. I took this opportunity to ogle Ghislaine. She surprisingly smiled and stripped in front of me, but by that time Nina was already ready, so we had to leave. I noticed Nina was looking at her own chest on the way back, and I could only smile weakly. Back home, in addition to reviewing Ghislaine's naked body, I reviewed what I learned yesterday and today. After dinner, I broke my routine and went out to the patio. I carried my dragon phoenix sword and closed my eyes. I raised my sword to the height of my head and concentrated my Tuki on it. "No, not like that," I said as I undid the control. I tried to do something different but ended up unconsciously making a long sword of silence. I had no idea how to do flow or any of the secret techniques. Now more than ever I needed a demonic eye as a guide. But who? I couldn't go to the demon continent to look for Kishirika. The solution was closer to me than I thought, and I knew it. To master this style, I first have to know how it works. I was using sword god style techniques, and it would be of no use like that. I guess this will take a while. Chapter 36, Seducing the Kitten plus 18 Autumn. A time of year so soothing and relaxing for many, the prelude to winter, where people must prepare for the merciless cold, but not in the sacred land of the sword where it snows all year round. Here the season is like any other, but for a specific part of the world's population it is not. What do I mean? The Didoldius. Autumn is their mating season. The process to choose your partner here is to challenge her to an owner and beat her. The winner will be the head of the family. But why am I, a simple human swordsman, so interested in Didoldia's mating season? Well, why is Ghislaine Didoldia here? The sexiest beast woman in the whole great forest in my opinion, and that of many others. But you might be wondering, Gino, why are you so interested in courting Ghislaine Didoldia if you already have Nina? And my answer is, why not? Also, joking aside, I need your help to understand Tuki. She is the only one in the sacred land of the sword who can see mana and Tuki with her demonic eye. I could simply ask her to help me, but I also want to make her mine. If you were in my position, you would do it just as well, don't deny it. And with that mindset, I kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And my training in the water god style has not been very fruitful either. I have learned the basic positions and concepts, but one thing is knowing the process and another thing is carrying it out. I'm a fool in that regard. And I'd be discouraged if I didn't have the aptitude for that style. It was the 2nd day of the 10th month of the year. Autumn was beginning and consequently the Didoldia mating season. As a result of this, Ghislaine stopped leaving her room in the dojo and rarely went out. Obviously I knew why. The only time she was outside during this time is in the mornings when she goes out to do her training, and it just happens to coincide with my running schedule. And so I got up before the sun came up with the excuse of going for a run as usual. But I strayed into the sacred land of the sword. I ran like crazy until I reached the dojo tenement. There stood Ghislaine, her gray hair reaching below her waist, that sexy brown skin, those breasts bouncing with every swing. Just seeing her had already made me hard. I also noticed that she was breathing with difficulty and her face was flushed. It seemed like he was just swinging to distract his mind rather than as a real workout. Ghislaine, I called out as I approached her. She was visibly startled, and when she saw me she squeezed her crotch. Gigino, what are you doing here? She said while breathing heavily. I challenge you to a marital duel, I said as I unsheathed my dragon phoenix sword and hid my face in absolute shame. Ghislaine was visibly startled by this and her tail began to wag like crazy. Marriage duel? But aren't you engaged to the daughter of the sword god? She said as she took a step back. Does that matter? I asked as I got into a combat stance. If I win, you'll be mine, I declared, and Ghislaine began to breathe more heavily. Okay, I accept. If I win, you will be mine, she also said. I smiled at this and could see Ghislaine looking at me lustfully. I put my foot on the ground. I made my Tuki travel to my sword as I always have, and I looked at Ghislaine. I jumped up and lunged at her. She must have taken it seriously because she immediately threw a long sword of light at me, which I effortlessly repelled. My sword advanced to Ghislaine's neck, and at the last moment I turned the sword to hit her with the blunt side. Ghislaine rolled through the snow until she crashed into a wall of the dojo. Shit. I think I overdid it. Are you okay? I said as I touched his sword and applied healing magic to it. Ghislaine stood up effortlessly and looked at me lustfully. You have defeated me, she murmured as she hugged me and rubbed against me. She was still a head bigger than me, so her tits were in my face. Yes, and now you are mine, I declared while hugging her. Ghislaine shuddered slightly and buried my face in her breasts. I rolled my face in them, savoring the smell of these. Are you going to make love to me? Ghislaine murmured lightly, and I could see her grip on his crotch. Do you want? I asked him. Yes, she murmured and took my hand, and we entered the dojo. It was only about 5 in the morning, so the sword saints would have just been waking up. Ghislaine held my hand as we walked through the quarters. She came to a room and quickly opened the door, and we entered. I closed the door behind me and a scent reached me. It's the scent of when a woman comes. I've already smelled it on Nina when we're alone, and this room smells the same. You've touched yourself here, haven't you? I asked him. Yes, since my heat period began. I have masturbated, thinking about you, she murmured as she took off her fur coat and the thread that covered her nipples, leaving her chest now completely bare. I'm surprised you didn't go for me then, I said as I took off my shirt. Well, you had the daughter of the sword god, so it didn't make sense, she said as she took off her pants. I took off my pants at the same time and was left in my underwear. To my surprise, Ghislaine was wearing a black thong and was already lying on the bed with her legs open. Shit, I don't want him to make fun of Gino Jr. But she's mine now, and if she does that, I'll have to tame her. With this thought, I took off my underwear, revealing Gino Jr., barely 11 cm tall. Embarrassment momentarily washed over me as I tried not to look at Ghislaine. What's wrong? What are you waiting for? She murmured as she looked at my little boy lustfully. Ah yes. This is a medieval world, what a relief. In this world there is no such thing as a standard for the size of your friend down there. It's a relief. Nothing, it's just that since I saw you I wanted to do this with you. I murmured as I climbed onto the bed and positioned myself between her legs. Oh yeah? Well, I was like, 'cause it was with me that you defeated me the first time? She murmured as she opened her legs wide. I pulled her black thong aside and placed my little friend at her entrance. She was slightly hairy and already very wet. Ghislaine's breathing became labored as she looked at me. I guess we shouldn't keep her waiting, right? In slow movements I entered inside her. She shuddered strongly and caught me with her legs. His expression was one of total ecstasy and his breathing was rapid. I started moving and she started moaning, aya, more. She moaned as I penetrated her. I was practically fighting for my life here. This was my first time in two worlds and that tight vagina didn't help. Thank goodness she's in her heat period so she's more sensitive than usual. If it were any other case my performance would be pathetic. Not even a minute has passed and I'm already about to leave. Think about something else, Gino. Did you know that in terms of Pokemon reproduction, a Vaporeon? I began to murmur under my breath as I continued to penetrate Ghislaine. Triple, I love you. She moaned and I could feel her sucking my soul out. Padre nuestro que estás en el cielo santificado sea tu nombre. I prayed in Spanish to concentrate. What are you saying? Ghislaine said with labored breathing as she hugged me. And nothing. I love you, I said as I increased the speed of my thrusts. Ghislaine arched her back at this and I felt a jet of water hit me in my belly. I couldn't help but smile unconsciously at this. Thank goodness I didn't come first. Do you want more? I murmured, but Ghislaine had her eyes closed and was breathing heavily. And no more, I can't any more, she said with a sensual voice that only increased my libido. At this I could not hold back any longer and began to thrust into her more forcefully. I'm coming. She moaned and I came inside her. I wasn't much of a masturbator. When I had sexual desire I would just swing the sword and the desire came from exhaustion, so I put a good load inside Ghislaine. The poor woman was barely conscious and was lying on the bed with her legs spread and a small line of semen coming out of her sacred place. It was a divine sight. And now that I think about it, I didn't touch those breasts at any time, so I started to caress those breasts. Ghislaine started to shudder again and came again. I took advantage of this and kissed Ghislaine on the lips. She hugged me by the neck and we stayed like that for about 3 minutes. And, what do you want to do with me? She murmured. After all now, you are the head of the family, she said as she sat on the bed and pulled me to her side. Now I want you to help me train. With your mana you will help me in my progress. After that I will go out into the world for 6 months and when I return I will become the god of the sword, I declared while caressing Ghislaine's breasts. I see. She murmured slowly. And after that, I'll settle down with you and Nina and get you pregnant many times over, I said, and I could see her blush deeply. So you're forming your own harem, huh? Ghislaine murmured with a smile. Yes, but I will love you all the same, don't doubt that, I declared firmly while looking into her eyes. Ghislaine was visibly surprised at this and then smiled at me and hugged me tightly. I'll be waiting for that then. In the meantime you can do whatever you want to me now that I'm yours, she whispered in my ear. Yes, you are, I said with a smile. This was a very touching moment, but a red-haired woman heard everything from the other room and she has complicated thoughts. Chapter 37 Progress. Very well, you're doing well. No, that's the way to do it for a sword god style student. Ghislaine said. Yesterday I lost my virginity with her and asked her to help me in my training in the water god style. Obviously, she doesn't know anything about that, but I just asked her to supervise me with her demonic eye. Shit, I muttered as I let my Tuki leave my sword. How about I see how that little girl Isolde does it and I'll explain it to you in detail? Ghislaine said with a smile. Since yesterday she has become more affectionate with me and now we are in the training yard of the central dojo. Yeah, that's fine with me, I'll see you tomorrow then? I said as I wiped the sweat off my forehead. Yes. She leaned forward and kissed me deeply, thank God no one was around. And since yesterday she's been very mean to me. Obviously, since I defeated her in a marriage duel, she's technically my wife now. And I excuse myself by saying that she's helping me in my training in the water god style, which is true, but even so, it's to avoid misunderstandings, besides that I noticed that Eris has been acting more coldly with me. I don't know why, nor does Ghislaine, but it's not something that really interests me, the damned Sundras are a pain in the ass. Right, and after that, just gather the Tuki into your sword, not like you normally do, your style makes your sword harder, our style makes it like a repellent, and you must learn how to manipulate your Tuki that way, Isolde explained in front of us. I was sitting next to Nina and Eris was standing next to Ghislaine. Alright, can you give us a demonstration? I said as I looked at Ghislaine. Alright, pay attention, Isolde said as she raised her sword and got into an attack stance. Eris did the same and stood in front of her. In order of this, Ghislaine lifted her eye patch revealing her demonic eye and she looked directly at Isolde's sword. And there was that thing again, that aura surrounding Isolde's sword. I looked directly but I couldn't see anything but a sort of oscillation in the shape of the sword. Arif, Isolde declared, and immediately Eris lunged at her with a long sword of light. I could see the process again. The technique was perfect in every way. It's literally a blade of light and it went straight to Isolde, but she simply cut the technique with her sword and the technique disappeared. Eris growled in frustration and looked at me out of the corner of her eye but quickly looked away. Strange. Well, could you see it well? Isolde said as she looked at us. Nina nodded seriously to my surprise, as did Ghislaine, although she had already seen it in a more technical way. Alright, who wants to try it first? Isolde asked as she looked at us. May I? Nina muttered as she raised her hand. Of course, Isolde replied. They both got into the water god stance, though Nina looked visibly uncomfortable at this. Alright, on the count of 3 I'll attack you in the chest. You must repel my attack, Isolde said, and Nina nodded seriously. She closed her eyes for a moment and then sighed deeply. 3. Isolde shouted and lunged at Nina at high speed, not at that of a swordsman of our level. She would give her the speed of an advanced level, but her style is not based on speed. With one accurate movement, Isolde attacked Nina diagonally right in the chest. Both swords clashed, but nothing more. There was no repelling or anything. Concentrate if you want to learn our techniques. Isolde screamed as she started attacking Nina faster. Tss. Nina clicked her tongue in frustration. With her level, she could defeat Isolde with a long sword of light, but that's not the point of this training. Hi-ya! Nina screamed as she deflected an attack from Isolde that created an opening, and with a well-aimed hit to her rib, Isolde went rolling to the ground. That's one way to do it, Isolde muttered as she got up from the ground. I did. Nina asked. You're kinda getting the hang of it, but you need to refine that technique, Isolde said, and Nina smiled at this. Nina looked at me and I nodded at this. Very well, that would be all for today. I also have my own training with the Lord God of the Sword, Isolde said as she entered the dojo. Alright, I'll ask Ghislaine to help me with my training. See you later, my love, I whispered in Nina's ear, putting special emphasis on the my love. In response, she blushed furiously and a silly smile appeared on her face. Why? I'll see you tomorrow then. She responded by kissing me on the cheek, and then she got up running back to the dojo. So only Eris remained, who didn't say goodbye to me, and I don't know where she went. Ghislaine just shrugged at this and we left the central dojo grounds, heading towards the forest for more privacy in every sense. In the privacy of the forest, I can both grope Ghislaine without worry as well as train without being disturbed, and now I was going for the latter. We walked for about 20 minutes until we reached a random spot in the forest. Ghislaine leaned against a tree and I stood in front of her while unsheathing my sword. "All right, could you explain to me the process Nina did, my love?" I murmured. Ghislaine was startled and blushed at this as she looked at me. "Yes," she murmured as she closed her eyes and breathed in and out deeply. "Hee, it's easy to play with her." "Yes, that girl's tuki moved in her sword very differently than you do. For starters, gather your tuki in your sword like you're used to," she said as she took off her white eye patch. I said as she ordered and concentrated my tuki on my sword. The way she did it was already as easy as breathing for me, and changing that way would obviously be difficult. "There it is, dear. Your tuki fits tightly to your sword, wrapping it completely and making it more resistant," she said as she stood behind me and hugged me by the neck. "Oh, kitty, it's not the time, although I can't blame her. She'll be ovulating all autumn." "I see. Can you explain to me then how Iseult did it?" I said while looking at my sword. "Let's see, it's hard to explain, but she gathered her tuki in a different way." "What a discovery! Different in what sense?" I muttered. "It was as if she fluctuated, and when she repelled the attack, her tuki gathered in a single point. This point would be the tip of the sword," Ghislaine explained while she began to caress my chest. I could only raise an eyebrow at this while I looked at her. "In what sense did it fluctuate?" I asked her while caressing her hand. "Like bubbles that ran through his sword irregularly, and as I said before, when he repelled Eris, all that energy gathered at the tip of his sword." Ghislaine muttered, "Gather it at the tip of the sword." I muttered, "Of course, it was that easy, wasn't it? In my condition as Sword Emperor, I can now repel long swords of light without a problem." "Wait, kitty, I want to try something," I said as I separated from his hug. "Can you look at my tuki, please?" I said as I got into a water god style stance. "Yes, what do you have in mind?" she asked as she took off her eye patch. I didn't answer and closed my eyes as I concentrated my tuki on my sword. No, I didn't stop at just my sword. I concentrated as much as possible on concentrating my tuki on the tip of my sword. "Now your tuki is on the tip, but that would only be until the end," Ghislaine murmured. "Yes, I know. Can you try to attack me?" "A long sword of silence so you don't kill me," I said with a smile. "Are you sure?" she murmured with concern. "That's why I ask for the long sword of silence," I said with a smile. "It's okay," she said as she got into an attack position, and the next moment she lunged at me. I could see in slow motion how she launched the attack at me. I could dodge it easily, but that wasn't the point. I could see the attack going for my shoulder. It was extremely slow from my perspective. I resisted the urge to dodge it and I intercepted the attack with my own sword. To my surprise, Ghislaine's sword literally bounced off the tip of my sword and she went rolling through the snow. I stood there in shock looking at my own sword. I did it. Did I do it? Wasn't it too easy? I looked at Ghislaine, who was getting up from the ground, and I helped her. "Are you okay?" I asked her as I made her get up. She just looked at me with lust and kissed me deeply. I was so excited that I could only kiss her back. Crack! I heard the sound of a branch breaking, and about 50 meters away from us Eris was there looking at us. When I looked at her, she ran away without saying anything. I guess she was surprised, huh? That was Eris? Ghislaine asked with labored breath. "Yeah, she saw us but she looked embarrassed so she left." I muttered. "I see, I'll talk to her later," Ghislaine muttered as she hugged me. "I just did it, didn't I? The flow technique?" I muttered with suppressed emotion. "Hey, it seems so," she said with a smile. The next day at our training with Iseult, I volunteered to go first. This time she would attack me. Eris for some reason looked upset with me and seemed to no longer want to train with me. Nina on the other hand was simply engrossed in Iseult's lessons. "Very well, Gino, I will attack you in the shoulder and try to repel the attack," she said. "Be careful, Gino," Nina said worriedly. I just nodded and concentrated my tuki on the tip of my sword just like I had done yesterday. "Very well, on the count of 3, 1, 3. Iseult shouted as she started to run towards me. As she said, her sword went to my shoulder. I turned quickly and our swords collided. The rumble of steel stunned my ears and Iseult's sword bounced off of mine and she fell back on the ground with a thud. She looked at me for a few moments with a stupefied expression. "Gino, that was amazing," Nina said excitedly. "That was the flow technique?" Iseult said in shock and quickly getting up from the ground. "I don't know, it was?" I muttered with a smile. "It can't be." She muttered but closed her eyes and inhaled and exhaled to calm down. "Very well, now let's get serious," she said with determination. The result was that I repelled all of her attacks again. We tried it with Nina and it was the same. Even Ghislaine tried it now with a long sword of light, and the same thing happened. "It seems it's how things are," Nina muttered with her eyes wide open as she wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at me. "Gino Britz is right. From now you..." Iseult muttered as if she couldn't believe her own words. "From now you are a water saint," she said almost in a huff as she turned back to the central dojo muttering something to herself. Even in the face of this scene, I couldn't contain my excitement. That day I had become stronger. Chapter 38. These confusing feelings. Eris POV. I like him. I like Gino Britz's. I'll say it bluntly, I like him. I didn't want to believe it. I thought I loved Rudeus. I came to train here for him. When I think about him, a smile forms on my face. I want to be with him. But when I see Gino, my heart beats like crazy. I get nervous and I have to be tough with him so he doesn't notice, just like with Rudeus when we were kids. These feelings overwhelmed me. I cried for many nights without knowing what was happening to me. Do I now love two men at the same time? That's not possible. How disgusting. Besides, Gino is already with that idiot Nina. That was what I thought for the first 4 months, but now we've spent more time together. Now I no longer think about Rudeus but about Gino in my free time, and when I think about Rudeus, guilt eats away at me and I start to cry. First of all, why do I love Gino? He's only been kind to me and helped me train, nothing more. I spent almost my entire life with Rudeus and this child is already in my heart. I don't accept it. I refuse to accept it. I love Rudeus. And no one else. And if that's so, then why? Why every time I'm with Gino I get so nervous and my heart beats like crazy? It's such an annoying feeling that I want to hit him but I know I never will. Just because he's stronger than me. That's why I love him. What the hell is that joke? I can't accept it. I love Rudeus? No. I screamed as I jumped out of bed. I looked around and was in my room in the dojo quarters. It's true that I've been here for more than half a year now. It seems like I had a nightmare. Ghislaine slept next to me. We both slept next to each other. It seems like I fell asleep. While I was stretching I heard footsteps from the hallway and heard Ghislaine's bedroom door open and slam shut. You touched yourself here, didn't you? A male voice said from the other room. Yes, since autumn began and always thinking of you, Ghislaine replied. My mouth went dry and my eyes widened at this. She is in her mating season, but to think that she would already look for someone. I'm surprised you didn't go after me then, the male voice said lecherously. I could feel my cheeks blushing and my hand instinctively went to my crotch. Well, you already have the daughter of the sword god, so there was no point, Ghislaine replied. My world stopped at that moment, and I recognized the man's voice. It was Gino. My heart skipped a beat at this and I felt like I was short of breath. Why? Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel this way for a man who is not Rudeus? Why am I jealous? This shouldn't matter less to me. But still, why does it hurt so much? Shortly after I started to hear Ghislaine's moans, that same Ghislaine whom I admire so much, she was making such erotic sounds. I wanted to burst into the room and stop them, but why would I do that? Our relationship could only be considered teacher-student. So why? Ghislaine's moans continued for several minutes until they stopped completely. I had tears in my eyes. I wanted to yell at him, complain and tell him how much he hurt me, but I have no right. He can choose the woman he wants because I'm not his. Neither did mine. I was just her friend. I tried to convince myself to think about Rudeus, to think about him cheating on me while I'm here training for him. I didn't feel the same, I just felt uncomfortable. I didn't feel as miserable as I do now. Do I love Rudeus? No. I love him very much, but I don't love him anymore, as a man. This realization made me cry with sorrow. The man I spent most of my life with, now he was replaced by that boy. This feeling did not help after seeing Ghislaine. I had to fake a smile with her. Every time I saw her the memory came back to me and burned my chest. It doesn't help that he started ignoring Gino. Why do I do that? What's the point? What message will I send him? I cried again. I love Gino. The next day was the same. I felt so stupid for ignoring him. I wanted to be angry with him and at the same time I wanted to tell him how I feel, but I couldn't. So I made a decision. I would tell him when we were alone. That day after training with Iseult, I left without saying goodbye for no reason. I felt like the dumbest woman in the world for doing that. When I returned to see him, he and Ghislaine were no longer there, so I decided to look for him in the woods. It took me about 40 minutes, but I found him and Ghislaine. The two seemed to be reviewing Iseult's teachings, so I stayed to wait for them to finish. Ghislaine attacked him at a speed I couldn't see, and Gino repelled her effortlessly. He looked so excited at that moment. My heart started beating like crazy. But then, they kissed, that burning in my chest came back, and they saw me. No. He saw me. I couldn't take it anymore and I ran away. I ran and cried. I cried and ran. I locked myself in my room to cry. I felt horrible. I felt jealous. I wanted to tell him what I feel, and the memory of Rudeus filled me with guilt. Unable to contain these emotions, I cried myself to sleep. The next day nothing improved. I couldn't start a conversation with Gino. For some reason I continued to ignore him. Just seeing him made my chest burn and I was mean to him by reflex, and the next moment I regretted it. I felt stupid. I love him. There is no doubt now. Why? Why do I love him? Him in the whole world, why him? But I love him and I want him to know it. Maybe tomorrow I can tell him. Shortly after, Ghislaine returned from the forest. My eyes were swollen from crying. I will talk to her first. Gino POV. I stood there looking at my sword. Iseult had entered the dojo muttering something I couldn't understand. Water Saint. Nina murmured from my side and my smile grew even bigger. It seems so. Yes, I am. I shouted with excitement. Nina hugged me and Ghislaine patted me on the back. But I don't understand. How could you do it so easily? Nina asked as she pulled away from my hug. I had Ghislaine's help and I'm also a genius, I said with a mocking smile, but it only made Nina raise an eyebrow. All right, genius, could you teach me? Nina said as she crossed her arms with a smile. Of course. In fact, I was going to train with Ghislaine right now. Do you want to come? I asked her. Nina nodded excitedly, and so the three of us set off into the forest. By this point Eris had already left without warning again. Once again it was shown that Nina was a genius with the sword, not at my level, but she was a genius. She was able to gather her tuki at the tip of her sword after a couple of attempts and help from me and Ghislaine. To test her abilities we used the long sword of silence, which she was able to repel but with difficulty. Even so, it was already a great advance. We estimate that in less than 2 weeks she could master the technique. Obviously Nina was in a very good mood about this, and she almost jumped in joy all the way home until we parted ways when she had to go home. Goodbye to her with a kiss, and once again I was left alone with Ghislaine. Do you want to do something now? I asked with a smile, but Ghislaine looked at me seriously. Yes, but first I need to talk to you. It's about Eris, she said while taking my hand. Oh shit, here we go? We walked for a while until we reached the forest again. Ghislaine stood in front of me and crossed her arms, her ears pricked up as if she was trying to listen to something. She is not close. Very good, she murmured. What are you talking about? I murmured curiously. Eris, I was watching her. I could hear her footsteps. But no, she said, I see, and what did you want to talk to me about her? I said while crossing my arms as well. Have you noticed since the day you claimed me, she behaved differently with you, right? Ghislaine asked and I nodded. Well, she talked to me and it turns out, how can I tell you this? Ghislaine muttered to herself. Oh, she likes you, he said bluntly. I could only raise an eyebrow at this. Is that so? And then why does he act that way then? I asked, but he obviously knew the answer. You see, she never told it, but she as well as I were left behind in a mana disaster in our home region. Eris spent around 3 years returning home with a boy. That boy is called Rudeus Greyrat, and according to Eris, when they were about to arrive they were attacked by the dragon god himself. In that battle Rudeus almost died and Eris was traumatized, Ghislaine explained while looking at me seriously. I remained silent as I listened to her. And from that day on, Eris swore to become stronger with the simple purpose of protecting him. She loved him, Ghislaine said. Oh, that's what she thought, and now it turns out she loves you. She said pointing at, that doesn't make sense, I replied. Yes, she doesn't, but Eris is sure of it, that's why she's so angry. She's angry with herself and at the same time she's jealous, Ghislaine said, and at the end she let out a sigh. Jealous? Jealous of what? Of us. I asked in disbelief. Apparently it is like that. She confessed everything to me yesterday. I told you that story only because you were my husband, she said with a smile. Thanks for telling me, I said with a smile. So, what are you going to do about it? Aren't you going to talk to her? Ghislaine asked. And what will I tell him? Oh yeah, Eris. Forget that boy you love so much and come into my arms and forget the only reason you came to the dojo? I said sarcastically and Ghislaine just looked at me in silence and sighed. At this I approached her and hugged her from behind. Ghislaine visibly shuddered at this and began to breathe heavily. Here? She murmured. Do you want? I replied with a smile and she nodded. We spent about half an hour there and Ghislaine came back with a huge smile on her face. Chapter 39 Decisions. After doing it for half an hour with Ghislaine in the forest, I returned home fully satisfied just like her. In this relationship she seems to be the submissive one because obviously I defeated her in the marital duel, but I want to dominate her on my own someday. I had nothing to do out here anymore so I returned home. The conversation with Ghislaine about Eris left me thinking. To be honest, I've never been very attracted to Eris. She's stupid, impulsive, loud, annoying, bad at listening and bad at learning. I'm not a masochist like Rudeus to put up with people of that kind, and I don't want to be beaten every time I try to touch my wife either. But the way you say it, Ghislaine, the girl must be conflicted about her feelings. I can understand it, but I don't know if I can correspond. I already have Nina and Ghislaine in my hands, and if everything goes wrong, also Roxy, and that doesn't stop worrying. Besides that, I've already decided to tell Nina about the situation with me and Ghislaine. She doesn't deserve for me to hide this from her like that. With this thought in mind, I returned home to dinner. Upon arriving, I announced my progress to my parents, and they obviously congratulated me. We had a dinner without any problems, and I went to take a bath. Tomorrow I would talk to Nina, and if the opportunity arises, also to Eris. My God, come to my aid. I woke up very early in the morning, did my exercise routine without problems, and after a nutritious breakfast courtesy of Mom, I went out to the central dojo. I hadn't thought about it until now, but I could call myself the second most powerful hihi. Why? You might ask. Well, because with each passing day, it becomes easier for me to put Dad in a difficult position, and recently I hold back against him. I arrived at the dojo and there they all were, Gull on his cushion, Nina and Eris swinging their swords together as well as Isolt. It was a familiar setting that I liked. You've come already, Gull said as he looked at me with a bored expression. You could say, I replied with a smile. Hey, I heard you became a water saint yesterday, Gull said with a raised eyebrow. Yes, it was a bit difficult to figure out, but I answered. But you skipped the whole process. You went from beginner to saint in months, ha? Gull laughed. Yes, after all I am a genius with the sword, I said with a fake mocking smile. Kama hee, it seems you are right. Gull said with a smirk. After training for a couple of hours, me, Nina, Eris, and Isolt met up at our usual spot. Ghislaine was no longer there because she had already fulfilled the purpose of her help. Very well. Phew, since Gino is already a water saint, I only have to teach you the only secret art I have learned. Isolt muttered as she looked at her sword. Nina had been practicing her movements with the flow technique. She had almost mastered it, but she still had some work to do. Eris is the one who has the most trouble due to her aggressive personality, but her skill with the sword is equally evident. And what is it? I asked as I stood up. Ocean mirror, she replied as she got into a fighting stance. I think you remember the technique from the teacher, right? Isolt asked and I nodded. Very well, since you are stronger than me, just use a long sword of silence, okay? Isolt murmured. Okay, I said as I got into a combat stance as well. In the blink of an eye, he shot towards her and made a long sword of silence. The objective was her shoulder. And there it was again. That strange screen, it looked like a mirror, and when I got there my speed was reduced. Ugh. Isolt complained at the force put into my attack. My sword was slowly reaching her shoulder. It's true she's not as skilled as Rida. At this I applied less force to the attack and was repelled again. I flew through the snow and fell on my ass on the ground. Thank goodness it was a wooden sword, as I now have a bruise on my left shoulder. Just a long sword of silence. She complained. But that was it. I muttered and Isolt's eyes widened as she looked at me. You almost broke my barrier, but could you understand the technique a little? She murmured. Shit, I'll have to ask Ghislaine for help again, damn it. The truth is no. It's still very confusing for me. I muttered with my head down. Oh, I see. She said with a relieved expression. I guess we've been crushing his ego lately, huh? Well, pay attention. Unfortunately for you, this is another technique where you must use your tuki on your sword. Isolt declared with a mocking smile, and I could only frown. It took me many years to master this technique, so pay attention. First, you obviously have to concentrate your tuki on your sword, then you have to release it so that it acts as a repellent barrier. Isolt said as she paused dramatically to look at us. You must make your tuki like an elastic that nothing can penetrate, she said. I listened to her in silence, but I already knew that I would need my kitten's help to do it. And that elastic, in addition to absorbing the blow, must return it. She said with excitement. Nina and Eris listened to her attentively, even though the lesson was just for me. I tried again to do as Isolt said, but it didn't work. I just couldn't imagine my tuki moving that way. After trying for an hour and failing, I suggested I would need help from Ghislaine again, and Isolt agreed. So another day of training came to an end. Isolt returned to the dojo, as did Eris, with the little news that now she did say goodbye, and I was left alone with Nina. It's moment to tell her everything. I invited Nina to walk through the woods for a few moments. We held hands the whole way. She was visibly blushing, which made me feel guilty. Hey Nina. I murmured, what's wrong? She said while looking at me. I need to tell you something very important, I said while looking at her seriously. The blush on her face disappeared and she still put on a serious face. I was surprised by the speed of this, to be honest. Go ahead, I'm all ears, she said with a small smile. Well, it's about Ghislaine, the beast woman, I said, and Nina raised an eyebrow as she looked at me. What's wrong with her? She said, well, it's just that. The point is that she is in her mating season, and when I defeat her I pay to become when I became the Sword Emperor, I stumbled over my words as I looked at her. Nina just rolled her eyes and silenced me by putting one of her fingers in my mouth. Shoo. I know. Do you think I don't notice the way you two look at each other? Besides, I already told you, right? It doesn't matter if it's her, as long as it's not Eris. She declared. I just stared at her and she smiled at me. And I can sense that you've already done it with her, right? Nina said as she crossed her arms and looked at me. Heh, yeah, you could say. I said with a weak smile, and Nina hit me on the shoulder. It's not fair. I wanted you to give me your virginity, she said, pouting as she looked away. I could see that she wasn't really upset, so I hugged her from behind. You can still give me yours, you know? I whispered in his ear. Nina shuddered in my hold weakly as she breathed heavily. Here. It's so unexpected. And I'm all sweaty, she said in panic. No, not here, silly. But just tell me when you want it and I'll eat you, I whispered to her. A silly smile appeared on his lips as she nodded. The atmosphere lightened, so I had to talk about the other thing with her. And besides, Ghislaine told me something important, I said. Nina turned to look at me and raised an eyebrow. What is it? She asked. Well, you see. And so I told her everything Ghislaine told me about Eris. No, no and no, I won't allow you, she firmly declared. I told Nina everything Ghislaine told me. At first she was surprised to know the reason why Eris came to train, but when the conversation turned to me, she became visibly upset. Gino Britzes, don't even think about accepting that crazy bitch's advances if you want to keep touching me, she said while pointing a finger at my face. Okay, you don't like Eris, huh? I understand, dear, but at least let me talk to her, okay? I won't accept her, but I will formally reject her, I said in panic. Okay, but poor you, Gino Britzes, for having a secret relationship with her. Now I won't be so lenient, she declared, and I could only lower my head in fear. I promise. You and Ghislaine are the only ones I love, I declared firmly. You promise? She said with her arms crossed. Yes, ma'am, I declared firmly. Sigh. Fine, I'll allow you to talk to her, but you'll reject her, she reaffirmed, and I nodded again. Thank goodness this relaxed her, and with a good fondling of those tits, she calmed down completely. Hey, how about you come to my house tomorrow, you know? She murmured, now relaxed, while I caress her tits. So soon? I said with a smile. Yes, I don't want to stay behind Ghislaine, she said. In the end I had to accompany Nina home, and I returned to mine. Dude, women are scary. So I returned home, still shaking slightly after the scolding Eris gave me, but in the middle of the road I met Eris. She looked upset and her eyes were red and swollen. Was she crying? What's wrong? I said as I approached her. Eris frowned as she looked at me. She frowned and crossed her arms as she looked at me, but I could see her lower lip trembling slightly. I need to talk to you about something important, she murmured as she looked away from me. Shit. Chapter 40 Rejection. I need to talk to you about something important, was what Eris said. Shit, I guess it's about time, right? But I mustn't let Nina down. I must reject her gently, yeah, that's it. But even if I reject her gently, what stops her from trying to hit me? Well, then it would be the first time I would allow it, but only one. With this thought in mind, I began to follow Eris. She walked quickly through the forest and I was behind her. I couldn't see her expression, but before she got ahead of me I could see what it seemed like she wanted to cry. We walked for 20 minutes until we reached the forest. We were in a leafy area full of trees that covered the sun. Eris stopped in front of me, then turned to look at me. I could see that she was blushing and had tears in her eyes. Are you okay? I asked her as I approached her. She took a step back and brought her hands to her chest. How long have we known each other? She muttered while avoiding looking at me. About 7 months now, I said, confused. I never told you the real reason why I came to train, right? She said while looking me in the eyes. You said you wanted to kill the dragon god, right? I replied. Yes, but I didn't tell you why, she said as she approached me. She walked until we were a meter away from each other. She wasn't looking at me and her hands were at the height of her heart. Let me tell you why I really came, she murmured. Eris spent about 20 minutes telling me everything she already knew, from when she met Rudeus until they arrived at Roa. I could see the mixture of love, guilt, loneliness, and hatred in Eris's expressions. The poor girl cried when she told me how she saw Rudeus almost get killed, so I had to hug her. She was now hugging me while telling me her story. And I came with the idea of becoming stronger, so that when I meet Rudeus again, I can protect him. She murmured, and the strength of her hug increased enormously. I could almost feel something was about to break. Poor Rinia and Persino when they slept with her. Ever since I saw you, everything changed, she declared while looking me straight in the eyes. I just looked at her in silence with my brows slightly furrowed. The point is that I thought I loved Rudeus, she said as she buried her face in my chest. But for some reason, I started to get interested in you, she said as she raised her head and looked at me again. She was blushing and her eyes were watery. Don't ask me why, but ever since I saw you, I felt something different, and that feeling has only grown, she said as she pressed closer to me. I could only shudder as I felt her breasts pressed against my chest. Gino, I love you. I didn't want to accept it. I cried days and nights trying to deny it. But I can't. I love you, she said and buried her face in my chest and started crying. I could only remain silent. Nina's warning was firmly in my memory, and now I just needed to know how to reject her in the kindest way possible. Eris's cry was of pain. It was harsh, and it made me sad to see her like that. The poor thing must feel super guilty for Rudeus right now. Eris, and what will happen to Rudeus? Will you leave him waiting forever? I murmured to her while stroking her head. Eris's crying stopped momentarily, and she looked into my eyes. I don't know, I promised to come back to him, but now I don't love him the same way anymore. She screamed. Shit, this is complicated. And how will you explain it to him? You won't tell him anything and wait for him to come looking for you and discover you with me? I said while looking at her seriously. I don't know. I don't know what to do. She screamed loudly and started crying again. This is the worst possible situation. Eris, when you think about Rudeus, what do you feel? I mean right now, think about him and tell me what you feel, I said softly. I feel calm, I feel nostalgic, she said with a smile. Well, and when you think about me, what do you feel? I said. Eris's cheeks began to blush rapidly and she squirmed in my embrace. You hug me and tell me you love me. I feel safe, I feel loved. You were always very kind to me despite how I treated you when I met you, she murmured. I could only close my eyes and eternally curse that fucking Hidegami. And, you didn't come to train just to protect Rudeus? You will abandon your purpose for me? I questioned her firmly. Eris hesitated momentarily and looked away from me. And what would happen if Orsted attacked Rudeus again? I asked her. Eris opened her eyes wide as she looked at me and gritted her teeth in anger, but then his expression turned doubtful and he sighed heavily. You would leave Rudeus and everything you went through with him, all the years, the laughter and the memories, for me? I said with my last resort. If it were up to you, yes. She murmured. It drives me crazy. It can't be true. It can't be true. It has to be a fucking joke. I looked Eris in the eyes firmly and I could see the love with which she looked at me. I gathered all my willpower not to blush. Making her see reason didn't work, shit. Now I'll have to use the painful strategy. Eris, so you would leave Rudeus for me? I asked her. Yes. She replied as she hugged me tightly. Enough, a female voice called. I turned instinctively and it was Nina. Shit, this can't get any worse. She was visibly angry and walked towards us and crossed her arms. Nina. This is not what you think. I said in panic. Shut up. I've heard enough. Eris, I need to talk to you. Nina said while pointing a finger at her. About what? Eris muttered as she separated from me. It's important, Gino. You can go now, see you tomorrow, Nina said while kissing me on the cheek. I stood there totally dumbfounded watching as Nina took Eris deeper into the forest. Well, if she gave me a kiss on the cheek it means she heard everything, right? Rigth. I returned home feeling totally disoriented, my attempts to persuade Eris didn't work, and now she's talking to who knows what with Nina. I just hope they're not coming to blows. When this thought crossed my mind I could only slap myself in the forehead for my stupidity. But I was already in front of my house, there was nothing to do, it was already night and my parents were probably already having dinner. But I don't have a set arrival time so it doesn't matter. I entered the house trying to hide how dejected I felt and had dinner in silence, took a cold shower and lay face up on the bed. Poor Rudeus. I muttered softly. Honestly, this is a shitty situation and I don't know what to do. Nina and Eris don't get along that well and leaving them alone would be the worst decision possible. I tossed and turned in bed trying to sleep but my thoughts were going a mile a minute. This would definitely change the story for the worse. I need some way to convince Eris that I can't love her or something. Who knows what consequences this could have on Rudeus' story. But Eris looked so in love with me. Those eyes. In those eyes there was only love for me. So much so that I'm even ashamed to reject her. But what can I do? I don't want to lose Nina and I'm not strong enough yet to defeat Gull. It's a shitty situation. I just hope Nina says something so Eris can reconsider. I woke up more tired than usual the next day. I had dark circles under my eyes as well as eye discharge, my throat was dry, and my hair looked like a bird's nest. I took a quick bath to change all this. Today it will be decided whether or not I receive a beating from Eris or Gull. I put on my workout clothes and went out for a run. My heart was beating faster than normal. I wasn't out of shape, I was just nervous. I was sweating more than usual and got tired faster. I couldn't concentrate well on anything. My mind was only thinking about what Nina and Eris talked about yesterday. I was even afraid to go to the central dojo. I was afraid of the consequences. But no. I am Gino Britzes and I never run away from my problems. That's what I repeated in my head to finish my cardio session and while I was dueling with Dad. But all this motivation ended at breakfast. It was something that could not be avoided. I tried to finish my breakfast as best I could and headed out to the dojo, my feet feeling heavier than usual the closer I got to the dojo. If everything goes wrong, at least I have Ghislaine. I arrived at the dojo around 6:30 in the morning. Everything was quiet as usual. But right at the entrance, Nina and Eris were there. Eris was swinging and Nina was sitting on the ground. She looked agitated. You must have finished doing your own exercises recently. When I was close they both looked at me, their eyes penetrated the depths of my soul and I stood there paralyzed. When Eris saw me, she blushed visibly. Nina looked at her and rolled her eyes and started walking towards me. Nina darling, good morning. I murmured softly, save those formalities, I have to talk to you about what happened yesterday, she said while looking at Eris. She shuddered and started walking towards us. Eris stood in front of me and Nina was at my side. I heard everything yesterday, what you said to Eris. I realized that you did keep your word, but I realized that Eris's feelings are real, Nina murmured softly. I looked at her with my eyes wide open, not understanding what was happening. She and I talked yesterday. I realized that she truly loves you and I know what I said yesterday. But I changed my mind, Gino, except Eris, Nina said while looking at me with her arms crossed. She had this look that she wouldn't take no for an answer. But I had too many questions to ask her, but I don't think she's going to answer them anytime soon. Nina, are you okay with this? I muttered as I looked at Eris, who was blushing and had her head down. Yes, I talked to her and now I understand everything, she replied with a smile. I could only stand there like an idiot, my thoughts instinctively turning to Rudeus. But if Hidegami keeps his word, there won't be any need for Rudeus to fight Orsted, right? Without thinking twice, I approached Eris and kissed her. She shuddered violently but kissed me back. It lasted about 20 seconds, and I separated from her so as not to disturb Nina. She had a slight pout so I kissed her too. Shit, This just makes things more complicated, but I'm a man, I can't help it. Chapter 21 to 40 is ended and next chapter 41 to 60 is here. Thanks for watching. If you want to suggest me anything, please comment. Thank you.